Are the Gi tribe connected to Jenova? Yes, definitively so I would say, just not in the way that you're probably thinking. I've got legitimately 75,000 words and over 3,000 collages here. The collages alone total up to 30 gigabytes. Google tells me that I have accidentally written a small book. So in consideration of this, I have opted to omit background music from this series so that one can more cleanly adjust the playback speed on YouTube. Yet, for the amount that I have to say, it ultimately all boils down to maybe 3 lines of dialogue and 2 sets of statues. There's a 30-second version, there's a 7-hour version. The Gi tribe arrived on Gaia far earlier than Jenova, yet the sealing idols which the Cetra created express clear Jenova mutations. Ergo, they had past contact, problem solved. There'll definitely be parts where I contradict or convolute my claims. Inevitably so at this scale, right? Against my better judgment, I've put like 5 or 6 months of active effort into this project. But come follow along with me anyway, because there's a lot more to be said on the matter. The Gi tribe are just the tip of the iceberg. Final Fantasy VII is a game of deception, and Jenova's biggest lie has yet to be exposed. Please be aware that this is a discussion written by and for those who have completed the compilation of Final Fantasy VII and many of its orbiting intertextual works multiple times over. If you have somehow managed to avoid spoilers for the remaining plot events of Final Fantasy VII as we approach Revelation, I would implore you to go into hiding and protect that, because that is so valuable a perspective in this day and age. Do not let me be the one to ruin it. I will be relentlessly spoiling Final Fantasy VII's entire chronology. I love the Final Fantasy VII Remake series. One large reason for this being because the way its depiction of the characters and setting unfolds, where it chooses to add extra context or where in the presentation it decides to revitalize its intertextual symbolic links with stuff like The Thing, Xenogears, Chrono Trigger, etc., all feels like it is done in accordance with my own preferences. At just about every step of the way, FF7 Remake is catering to me as an FF7 essayist fanboy. On my, 6th playthrough of FF7, one story element that I did consciously think I would like to have more information about is the mysterious race of intelligent, non-human beings sealed deep beneath Cosmo Canyon, the Gi tribe. They kinda gloss over it, but that seems important actually. Sure enough, FF7 Rebirth made them a much, much bigger deal by giving them greater exposition, a deeper sense of culture, and by using them as a means to expand FF7's galaxy by establishing them as aliens with their own red spirit energy that prevents them from being absorbed into Gaia's green lifestream. I don't think that they're going to end up especially important to FF7 Remake's future trajectory. They aren't some missing link for Part 3 or anything. The alien Gi largely exists as background lore to better substantiate the black materia, since it was always a bit odd in the original that the planet-loving ancients would possess magic to blow it up. But the more you ponder upon their riddles, upon the symbols found in their culture, the more fascinating and complicated their circumstances become. What first stuck out to me when Gi Natark stepped into frame was the striking colour combination of his dark blue skin and burning pink eyes. This immediately grabs my attention because where have we seen this colour scheme before? Jenova. When you see a man like that glaring daggers at Aerith, you'd naturally think it's related to Jenova's war. We then let the shaman guide us into the land of the dead, where he begs the party to retrieve their black materia and cast the world-ending magic Meteor. Who arrived on a meteorite? Jenova. If you look around closely, you can even locate these sharp-toothed skull masks mounted onto ceremonial lanterns, which resemble both Jenova Dreamweaver and its derivative specimen H0512, or stone carvings of somewhat Jenova-like skeletal knights. The smaller statues which Nanaki uses to open the seal on the Gi's cave do all give me Jenova vibes as well, with the random appendages or tentacles mutated onto a bipedal form. It does seem like the links between Jenova and the Gi are therefore multiple and super apparent. I'll now be presenting some screenshots, collating all the things I've found which point to Jenova having once had presence in the village of the Gi. After which, I'll engage in a series of my own questions and answers to try discerning why this imagery is present and what history we can glean from it. I'm not trying to clickbait or anything, but the answers I reached kind of surprised even myself. Let's just say that by the end, I have come to suspect someone here is not who they claim to be. Through Xenogears, we can use Final Fantasy X to explain Dirge of Cerberus within FF7 Rebirth. If you want to know what on earth that means, you're going to have to give me a few hours. There are just 2 or 3 seemingly random enemies who might tie everything together in the most unexpected way, and but a single one which I believe can crack the case wide open. The reading I get out is not that which I expected when heading in. I had the framework envisioned in my head, went in to find evidence, it didn't fit, and so have come out believing in a more complex timeline of events. Then, once I was 26,000 words and 100 plus collages in, I had an epiphany that saw me rerouting all my conclusions. We will get to that eventually though. For now, let's look at some statues. The most important, and plainly just the coolest looking thing I noticed linking Jenova to the Gi is in the ancient temple. When I first played FF7 Rebirth on PS5, I mourned that it was impossible to clearly see the mural of Jenova that was hidden in the shadows at the other side of the divide. With the PC release, I was finally able to take the camera over there using FreeCam tools. I decided to continue panning around and have a closer look through the murals in case they were hiding anything exciting, which is where I noticed that its Corridor of Apocalypse depicts a demonic face hanging above the Gi as they forge the black materia. This face, with its 6 eyes and sharp teeth, matches to the giant statue which we can find carved into the village of the Gi's cliffside shrine to Oblivion. The Shield of Angel Penance also has the motif of a 6-eyed face with a sharp-toothed smile. Angel Penance. A penance imposed by the planet. Maybe they're being a little cheeky there. But even then, there was only so much I could do with the FreeCam unlocker and its spotlight function, so since I cannot control myself and frequently use these kinds of projects as excuses to spend money on art books that I definitely, absolutely, surely need, I did bite the bullet and order the Japanese version of the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Material Ultimania, instead of waiting for the localization in what I had originally phrased as late next year. But of course, the way I operate, I put off recording my narration for so long that the English version is only a few weeks away now anyway. Frankly, it's probably out, let's be real. So here are some better quality scans of the mural concept art before the discoloration and weathering effect from the rock wall is applied. As I didn't have a save in the Gi village, I had to quickly rush there from the beginning of Chapter 10. Along the way, I noticed that Bugenhagen's museum has a painting or photo of a meteor above Cosmo Canyon. This resembles Jenova's meteor seen in the Stewards of the Planet presentation. The Gi spectres have ethereal feathers that form around them. This is simply part of the revival spell, but does nonetheless call to mind how Jenova Dreamweaver emits ethereal purple feathers, and Sephiroth is constantly shedding black. Here's the real kicker though, which will steer a significant part of the discussion on this matter. Decorative skull masks with tusks or pincers that resemble Jenova Dreamweaver and Jenova Emergent can be found throughout the village of the Gi. In some cases, these are accompanied by Jenova's purple spirit wisps, as opposed to the Gi's usual red. Further to this point, the corridor of effigies in the Temple of the Ancients is filled with statues of cloaked Cetra wizards and some demonic creature that heavily matches to the skull and tusks of Jenova Dreamweaver and the Gi masks. This is possibly a subtle reveal of information that Jenova had based her form on a demon from either Cetran or Gi folklore in order to most effectively terrorize them. Having so many of them intermingled with the shamans is likely symbolic of how Jenova's imposters had begun to infiltrate the Cetra's communities. The idea that this shape was lifted from folklore is somewhat supported by the blighted spirit. a form that Jenova took in the Asian-themed Igara region, which had a totally different skull and spawn that looked more like classical yokai instead of the sci-fi abominations that we usually see. Here's another decorative effigy which very lightly resembles Jenova Dreamweaver's form. Note that the gap between the two masks in the middle almost gives the impression of a big mid-body mouth, which is once again similar to a feature observed on Angeal Penance. It's very obscured in normal gameplay, but the Lake of Blood has a twisted skull face in the stone wall at the end that rather resembles Jenova's skull. The first effigy in the village of the Gi holds a weapon with spirals that resemble Jenova's wings at Mount Nebel. The statue of what I'm assuming to be Jenova at the Gi altar has little fleshy wings coming off its back, which resemble that of the Mount Nebel Jenova's wings. Wings are consistently illustrated to be a feature of Jenova and her spawn. As Gi Natak ferries us into his land, we pass by several large statues. These are all disfigured and mutated, some with horns, some with tentacles. It is of note to me that a couple have the same kind of halo at their back that Seifer Sephiroth and Jenova have both displayed, and one has what could be interpreted as a single wing on his left shoulder. The larger effigies placed throughout the village of the Gi all have mutations of some sort, such as 4 arms, crab legs, insect-like appendages, and a long tail. These clearly seem indicative of Jenova's touch to me. Out of these effigies, I feel that the one with the tail and insect-like appendages particularly resembles the necrotic entity mutation. Gi Natak has these lines you can spot on his chin, presumably running up the rest of his face, that resemble one of the 2 Jenova murals and the old design of the Jenova doll. Finally, and of most central importance, is that the Gi have distinct red spirit energy, which the game draws particular attention to when you assess them. Enemy intel makes it sound like this is unique to the Gi tribe, yet the Shadow Blood Queen, which I am certain is meant to be one of Jenova's earlier incarnations, has red spirit energy instead of her usual purple. After meeting with Gi Natak, Cloud sees a vision of Sephiroth standing before him. When he vanishes, his usual purple haze has a red section floating through it. Those two are things I cannot ignore. The game has surely indicated some aspect of Gi within Jenova. With the iconography presented, I think it's clearly been conveyed that the Gi have had contact with Jenova at some point in their history. Just look at those mutations. But how and in what form this manifests, I'm not immediately sure. This is actually quite complicated, and there might simply not be enough info in Rebirth to truly tell yet. I'm hoping we'll be told more as the third game spends more time with the black materia. I'll now be moving into some of my own personal questions and answers. Uncovering Jenova in Cosmo Canyon. Section 1. Red Pyreflies and Planet Terra. Isn't that 6-eyed stone carving Gi Natak? I just don't think that it is. Logically at least, I could sort of see it being a representation of the tribe's leader. The Black Materia mural gives us 4 shaman elders surrounding Gi Natak. These 4 are likely the effigies we see, which also match to the 4 ceiling statues. So then maybe the remaining spiky one is Gi Natak. He does wear a carnivore mask sort of like that thing's bestial face, and his battle mode is bulky with random vertebrae swinging around. But while the other effigies are clearly Gi warriors, this stone creature would then instead have to go against the grain as a super loose, metaphorical depiction of Gi Natak, since none of his features match. He only has 2 eyes on his battle helmet or the skull he wears, with no lower jaw on the skull to create that sharp smile. Gi Natak doesn't have wings or spikes, and the stone face lacks his huge, distinctive antlers. Before even bothering to evaluate any of that stuff in the village, the Black Materia mural depicts this face as a separate entity, so I don't think the idea that it's an effigy of Gi Natak is particularly convincing. Importantly, positioning it as such would offer no consideration to the motif manifesting on Angeal Penance at all, since that one should be related to Jenova. The FF7 remake games have generally been very conscious about respecting all the little nooks and crannies of the compilation. so I don't believe they'd simply overlook or forget about Angeal penance. The Vargid Polis, which appeared to be Jenova's main way of merging with the Black Robes, has 6 eyes as well. Concept art of the Gi idol revealed in Rebirth's Material Ultimania looks nothing like the final in-game version from both the village and the temple. Maybe they changed things once they began to piece together the Gi's alien lore. I don't see a scenario where that stone idol in the village of the Gi is just meant to be Gi Natak. It's gotta be Jenova, but we have to put in some work to figure out how. Does it really have 6 eyes? It seems that way to me. I get that it could be 4 eyes and then the skull's orbital fissures, and one piece of concept art does depict this idol with 4 eyes. But that prototype doesn't reflect the final design at all, and the clean version of the black materia mural fills in the top 2 holes as if they were also eyes. So I'm proceeding with 6, yes. Side note, the slit eyes and rectangular horns from that concept art heavily resemble Jenova synthesis, and thus would have implicated an even stronger connection anyway. What form did Jenova land on Gaia in? There are only 2 options. The first would be that Jenova landed on Gaia as a woman, as per the depiction in the Hall of Murals. The woman in the mural, or what traits we can glean of her, does look relatively similar to the Jenova at Mount Nebel. Greyish-blue skin, flowing silvery hair. Notably, the grey skin Jenova is drawn with here is unique and deliberate, because the cetra surrounding her have beige skin. Initially, I had considered that these murals might simply be interpretive, since the woman depicted matches to neither the angel hologram we see in the same room, nor to the design of the Shadow Blood Queen, who is the earliest instance we know of a significant Jenova appearance. Thinking about it again though, the Shadow Blood Queen is an imposter who replaced the Cetran Queen of Gongaga, whereas the mural would be depicting Jenova herself landing at Null's Pole. So that doesn't actually disqualify it. Another reason I wonder if the murals are intended to be artistic representations is since they seem to depict Jenova ejecting herself from the meteorite before it crashed and landing directly in their city as a human-like golden goddess, which is not how those events are currently known to have happened. According to Athalna, thousands of her people had gathered at the crater to do a planet reading and attempt to aid the lifestream in healing the wound. But when this failed, the Cetra planned to flee the Null's Pole region entirely. It's as they were making their preparations to leave that Jenova emerged from the North Cave and began to appear before them in the visage of the dead or missing. First contact happens at the crater, not at the actual capital within Null's Pole that the mural portrays. We could easily just speculate that Remake has rewritten this part of Jenova's history though. While I'm here, I should probably just clarify the distinction that the North Crater is the whole thing, while the North Cave is that elevated feature in the middle. It's possible to discern this from the original, but much easier to understand via the more recent depiction in Ever Crisis and Revelation. You climb an area called Gaia's Cliffs to reach the rim of the North Crater, then descend into it and traverse the Whirlwind Maze to reach the North Cave. This platform then collapses when the weapons are roused, exposing the entrance to the subterranean cave more clearly. The Great Cavern of Wonders is another cave system also within the boundaries of the North Crater. Something else I keep thinking about is that in the first Soldier, we have a Jenova-possessed character subtly suggest that soldiers were enhanced with cells grown from something they scraped off a meteorite. Yet by all accounts, Shinra didn't find Jenova on a meteor, they dug her body out of the fossil record. So this may be Jenova inadvertently leaking her own information about the arrival. Therefore, I think it equally possible that what landed on Gaia was either just surviving cellular matter or a mass of flesh, not a distinct humanoid body latched onto the meteorite. Really, there are good arguments for both options. I'm a bit undecided for now, so I'll keep both options in mind as the discussion progresses. Did Jenova land on a meteorite? So they say. Full transparency that while the original Final Fantasy VII in-game texts never actually indicated what caused the crater, The Final Fantasy VII Ultimania Omega and Crisis Core keyword collection do explain that Jenova landed with a meteorite and that the North Crater was created by a falling star. Alongside this, we have two sources within the new FF7 content claiming that the Ancients were ended by a meteor that impacted the planet 2 millennia ago. The art books are definitive, but at least with the rewrites there is some room for doubt. The thing is that both of those could be unreliable. One's an idealized Shin representation, the other is literally the deceiver herself, and there is an alternative reading that you could prop up. FF7 is a game with lots of intertextual links. Perhaps its most primary inspiration is The Thing, where a shapeshifter's spaceship crashes at the South Pole thousands of years prior. Its main predecessor is Chrono Trigger, where although the genetic scourge Lavos had landed as a living meteorite itself, it does become associated with the Black Omen spaceship. Xenogears is FF7's counterpart project that has an overlapping production history, and there Deus is deeply tied to the Eldridge colony ship that crashed to the planet. So then, tracking the aesthetic lines, where is Jenova's spaceship? Does she have one? She probably should. Well, the original design of the North Cave does look more like a metallic hull than it does a mountain range, even having near identical texturing to the Eldridge. Its new depiction in Ever Crisis looks even more like a beached shipwreck. And while we haven't clearly seen Revelation's North Cave as yet, one of the murals in Northwood does put Jenova inside of some unidentified pod when she lands. Perhaps the Shinra company is wrong, as they so often are about Jenova, and what crashed at Null's Pole was actually a spaceship. On the other hand though, that is a pretty substantial conspiracy at current. Sephiroth at least has indicated Jenova to be more celestial than scientific. Whether it was a meteor or a crashing spaceship doesn't necessarily matter too much to Jenova's overall timeline, but it can be relevant to the arrival of the Gi tribe. I'll return to this idea where it becomes relevant in the next video, but for the moment I will nonetheless continue with the more prominent claim that Jenova did impact planet Gaia while attached to a meteorite. What are Jenova's key dates? By nearly all accounts across every game and art book, Jenova landed on Gaia about 2,000 years prior to Final Fantasy VII. FF7's main chunk spans mid-December 2007 to late January 2008, but specifically it would be given as 2,000 years before the Jenova project, which commenced on September 13, 1977, so Jenova might have landed in the equivalent of 24 BC. Technically though, at least as far as the Igara region is concerned, in 1992, Alyssa mentions that the Cetra colonized southern Wutai 2,000 years ago, and the alien beast had invaded before a century had passed. Alyssa herself is being controlled by Jenova's will during this campaign, so the invaders' arrival might have more specifically been between 1900 and 2,000 years ago. All things considered, I think it would be a safe bet that this wiggle room was introduced just so that we could cleanly say Jenova's arrival marked the change of the Common Era, at the equivalent of 0 AD or 1 AD, whatever it is. I will acknowledge that in Crisis Core, Jenova's forehead plaque does state that she was Haken or uncovered on October 10th, 1959. Then Fuin or sealed in the tank on the 2nd of July 1967, but this has never made sense. That would mean Shinra located her around the same time as Marco and left her ignored at Mount Nebel before Midgar had even begun development. The actual history documentation always places Jenova's discovery as something that happened by Gast in 1977. So I would just ignore that date from her Crisis Core model because it disagrees with every other piece of information we have. The original 1997 inscription was a tongue-in-cheek fourth wall break crediting development to Square themselves, and in Rebirth it's again been altered to some other numbering system that I don't recognize. Do I think Jenova is originally a Gi woman possessed by a cosmic devil who became the shapeshifter? Is the woman in the tank a Gi queen? Are they her native people or her progeny? Not in the way that question was framed. I think she infiltrated planet Gi, likely obtaining a position of political and religious power, but I do not believe that it was her origin point, nor that the Gi are her direct offspring. All of the effigies do display Jenova-like physical traits, but these I would say are her standard mutations, rather than a result of them genuinely being Jenova's children. Any suggested visual link between Gi Natak and Jenova is almost entirely rooted in comparison with the woman that Sephiroth finds at Mount Nebel. I did myself mention that the first reaction I had upon seeing Gi Natak was furiously scribbling down notes about how his colour scheme matches Jenova. However, when you use FreeCam to get a clear glimpse, they don't actually look similar. Although Gi Natak does have blue skin and pink eyes, which had always been Jenova's colour scheme, FF7 Remake, Crisis Core Reunion, and FF7 Rebirth all give her modelled grey skin and red eyes. It is strange that they'd make the Gi look so deliberately in line with what we've always known Jenova to be, yet then change the lady herself. But nonetheless, in the most current visual representations, that Jenova and the Gi do not match in their physical features. And while the necrotic entity or other Jenova hybridizations do have a blue hue to their skin, this originates from the Marconoid creatures they combined with. It's not necessarily an indicative trait of Jenova itself, as neither its man nor monster are represented like that in Rebirth. If we're looking at any kind of advanced Jenova-human hybrid to see what colour their skin is, then we should probably be looking at the Marconoids which were growing inside of the Mount Nebel Marco chambers. While these have not traditionally been known to possess Jenova cells, instead being referred to as an intensive Marco mutation, the Rebirth Material Ultimania describes them as being akin to a juvenile form of Heretic Rayleigh, which is what the diabolic creation and variant are named in the Japanese script, indicating that they have some hefty dose of the mutagen. In the original versions of Final Fantasy VII and Crisis Core, the Marconoids are the same light blue that Jenova is, while in Rebirth they have grey skin that matches the new Jenova design. Crisis Core features two breeds of Marconoid. One is the blue and orange mutant escaped from Hojo's R&D labs, while the second is an all-grey design specifically dosed with G cells rather than the original J cells. The woman at the Nibelheim reactor is not blue and pink. That's not to say no Jenova in Rebirth has had pink irises, however. Jenova Lifeclinger's battle takes place in this cosmic horror arena, a chamber of guts and vertebrae and too many eyes. Most of those eyes are red, some of them are blue, and the remaining few are indeed pink. Also of note is that the bodily eye growths seen on Jenova Emergent and Jenova Lifeclinger are both pink, though with totally different irises to each other. And in the final phase, Jenova Lifeclinger's main eyes glow pink. Yet, the amount of variation makes it impossible to link them to Gi Natak's eyes. They are pink, but they're also blue, red, and black, and at no point does their design ever match his. I feel that the beast forms are beginning to veer into a totally different conversation anyway. If we're trying to contrast Gi Natak's colour scheme to anyone, it's the woman in the tank, and she no longer matches to what she once was. For what it's worth, Gi Natak is also super tall, has dark blue skin, unlike classic Jenova's light blue skin, pointy ears, and black hair. Jenova is a normal height, has grey skin with just a hint of beige in her face, human ears, and silver hair. Granted, Jenova Lifeclinger does have some span of deep blue skin identical to its twin brain spawn, and the temple murals depict Jenova as twice the height of the surrounding Cetra, similar to the Gi. But neither of these can be applied to Nibelheim because the fact of the matter is that this woman is grey. In fact, I think that the living Gi may have been quite a lot larger than we realise, or at least that they had some giant warriors in their army, since the artistic representations we can find show them to have had quite a large size variation among their people. Gi Natak's spirit is already over twice the size of Cloud, but this is perhaps just the form he took to best commune with the human party. The holograms in the Corridor of Apocalypse depict the Gi as stretching all the way to the ceiling of the temple, and while it may be tempting to think that this is just symbolic of how the Cetra perceived this threat, there are similarly enormous weapons scattered all throughout the Wall of Honor where Seto's body stands. Sometimes games make background elements larger so that the player can see them easier, like the giant NPCs in Mario Kart, but I don't believe that to be what's going on here. Even without FreeCam, we can tell just how massive those swords and axes are. The set of weapons surrounding the first effigy that Nanaki encounters are all about the same size as his body, but further into the cavern there are shields, axes and polearms that make the characters look minuscule. The original English release of FF7 has Bugenhagen mention that the Gi were large in numbers, but limited by the narrow passages of the cavern. The Ever Crisis version, however, describes the Gi themselves as being colossal. Right outside the village of the Gi, we can find a few statues of Gi warriors, but their abstract faces make me question if these are just tribal art forms rather than genuine effigies. It's still worth noting that these are also quite tall though. Once we head into the village, we begin to encounter more detailed and believable effigies, which present the Gi warriors as being much, much larger again. Given that the bodies and faces of these ones seem more realistic, I'm even left to wonder if these may be the Gi elders with their bodies turned to stone just as happened to Seto. This sentiment might be supported by the material Ultimania. Page 132 translated says, "The giant statue in the village was made using the remains of a Gi warrior who died in battle." At the very least, the smaller stone guys we can find toward the Shrine of Oblivion are indicated to be actual Gi bodies petrified in prayer by the material Ultimania, which reveals that the stairway was built out of their bodies. So I consider it incredibly unlikely for that Jenova woman to have been of the Gi. She is growing out of a giant heart. This traces back even to the original 1997 game. But my assumption has always been that Jenova generated this in order to try and keep herself alive inside of the intense Marco bath. Rather, I believe that the form Sephiroth finds her in was Jenova using what limited power she could muster under confinement to shapeshift into Lucrezia, because she knew that was the appearance which would leave him the most vulnerable. The way Jenova got buried in the first place is that the Cetra of the northern Nullspole region had waged a final desperate war against the invader. The Hall of Murals illustrates to us in 2 locations that Jenova had returned to the Dreamweaver form in order to fight against the oncoming forces. Yes, I did double check its model for any inconsistencies. That is Dreamweaver. And we glimpse video record of Jenova being excavated looking like the usual skull-faced demon while Sephiroth is reading Professor Gast's research. So I don't think Jenova was dug up as that woman. Instead, Ever Crisis the First Soldier illustrates that Jenova has been manipulating Sephiroth's dreams using Lucrezia's image since 10 years before the Nibelheim incident. He comes into contact with Jenova's spirit contained within Masamune during September of 1992, and is dispatched to Mount Nibel on September 22, 2002. During this Masamune incident, Angeal illustrates that mental health is key to rejecting her control, so her grip over Sephiroth presumably lessens as he grows up and gains that support system through Angeal and Genesis. But her influence then surges once again when Genesis betrays and condemns him, Sephiroth's broken heart creating room for Jenova to latch onto his mind quite deeply. Even prior to Nibelheim, Jenova has read his heart and knows precisely how hard Lucrezia's image hits him, hence why I allege she transformed to welcome him. Barring that, since people are strangely opposed to the idea of it being Lucrezia, you could also suggest that her female form is just a Cetra woman, either some random shaman, or more specifically that face could belong to Minerva, since I'd consider her a likely candidate for the Emerald Witch that put the Shadow Blood Queen to death. The Emerald Witch uses so-called arcane powers, yet the first soldier reveals that Terudama, aka Materia, were actually a rare sight in Jenova's time. Minerva has innate magic since she's a lifestream manifestation existing somewhere between summon and weapon, and so could be the emerald-coloured witch wielding arcane powers. Ifalna's necklace also seems like it could be a motif of Minerva's judgment arrow, lending credence to the idea that Cetran society was aware of her existence in the past. Side note, in a second I will also be trying to unravel the visual overlap of Lifestream goddess Minerva and Jenova's past mimicry of her as the goddess of Guardia from the two conflicting depictions we have of Loveless. Otherwise, if none of that sates ya, that woman in the tank could also be compared to Shiva. Not the summon, but the Cetran Queen of Null's Pole who used powerful ice magic to coat the North Crater after it was struck by Jenova's meteor. The Shiva summon is implied to be based on that queen. Shiva's loading screen describes her as an ice elemental entity and ruler over the world of ice. It is said that she once saved the planet from certain destruction by staunching a great wound with a glacier. While her enemy Intel states, an ice element summon recreated in virtual reality. It is the manifestation of a queen who once healed the planet's wounds with ice, as evidenced by the existence of permafrost in the polar lands. Or, if you want to get radical, I do want to introduce the idea in brevity that if you remove the narrative implications for Lucrezia, Minerva, Shiva, and just purely look at Jenova, I think that the closest fit, taking the entire Final Fantasy VII continuity into consideration, is Yunalesca. In a bid to remain on topic for the Gi, I will leave the bulk of my observations for the final section, which will land in the fourth video of this set. That is to say, up until very near the final cut, I was fully intending to spend the next 25 or so minutes talking about aesthetic overlaps and plot overlaps between Jenova, Yunalesca, Sin, Sephiroth, Seymour, Lifestream, Pyreflies, Materia, Spheres, and so forth. But considering I will also soon be looking at Xenogears for about 20 or so, at that point I'm too distractingly off topic for FF7 even by my standards. So, shoved into section 4 she goes. But if I can just speed through it for context to later points. Connecting FF10 to FF7 rose to prominence not as fan theory, but as something introduced and majorly substantiated by the actual staff. Developer interview sections among the original FF10 Ultimanias acknowledged how scenario writer Nojima had coincidentally inadvertently designed the settings and spiritual cycles of Gaia and Spira in similar ways. Not because they intended a plot link as yet, but just because that's how the story came out of him. But FF10-2 then introduces a character named Shinra, who endeavors to harness the spiritual power of the Farplane, the planet's very life force, into a commercialized energy source. Then when we get to the 10-2 Ultimania, Nojima lays out a more specific sequence of events where Shinra's descendants would reach planet Gaia around a millennia after FF10-2 and establish the Shinra Company. He would later walk this stance back a bit during a 2017 interview, but Kitase has still reaffirmed it afterward, and there's a lot of very intentional synergy with FF10 worked into the mechanisms of the FF7 remake projects. The cliff notes of the connection are just that Pyreflies are Spira's life stream, the Farplane is its internal Sea of Marco, and for the topic of the Mount Nebel Jenova, Yunalesca has a very similar face, shapeshifts, has crazy hair, Jenova-like skulls on her tentacles, preys upon negative spiritual energy and maintains the cycle of sacrifice, and has striking red spirit energy, all of which are echoed in Remake Jenova. And with the awareness that they exist within the same universe, Remake Jenova's new red and purple hazes are something first seen alongside Yunalesca. Yunalesca assuredly did not become Jenova because the Gi are far more ancient than the Spirans, but I would entertain the idea that she was a key contact. Despite Yunalesca herself supposedly being deeply in love and longing for her husband Xeon, what we hear of said Summoner Princess in the novella from an actual first-hand source is that during the Machina War she had taken many oaths with many warriors, motivating them with a kiss, though Sloane would speak more harshly of this, referring to it as brainwashing. This sounds like Jenova's behaviour in The Legend of Loveless. I know that bringing up Final Fantasy VII and X in the same sentence makes people very angry, but just humour me as I go on. I will explain it more deeply about, 6 hours from now. How come we don't also see unsent Spirins if Jenova and the Gi tribe are cursed to wander eternally as outsiders? Does this not disprove FF10 being connected to FF7? Well, we don't have any confirmation that there aren't unsent Spirins hiding anywhere on or within Gaia, but I'd say the difference is that Spira still exists, which is decidedly not the case for the homeworlds of Gi or Jenova. Aerith once indicated that souls can travel a distance before dispersing, while Lucrezia and Seymour both indicate the existence of a larger cycle of life within the universe. So perhaps the souls of Spirins do make the journey back home. Wait, isn't Minerva the goddess of Loveless? To begin with, Minerva's an enigma. What do we actually know about her or her circumstances? Here's a description from the Crisis Core Complete Guide. With her body clad in an impressive suit of golden armor, she is the existence that transcends all matter. Beneath her helmet, she is a beautiful woman with blonde hair and green eyes. In scene 1006, Genesis fulfills his wish to meet her, and she appears in mission number 288, the Reigning Deity. She is interpreted to be the goddess mentioned in Loveless, but in terms of substance she is similar to a summon, though it seems that the purpose behind her actions is to follow the intentions of the lifestream. Minerva is similar to a summon, and her intention was not necessarily to revive Genesis. The image of Minerva in her actions and expressions is a reflection of the will of the lifestream. She's kind of like a high-tier summon embodying the will of the lifestream, first encountered beneath Benora, which is to the west of Midiel, then fought by Zack in the Great Cavern of Wonders, which is a secondary system nearby the North Cave. In battle, we see that Minerva commands moves from the summons. She surprises you with Shiva's ice, smacks you with Ramuh's lightning, fills the battlefield with Ifrit's fire, and tracks you with Bahamut's photon blasts. Though describing her as merely a high-tier summon does not convey the full scale of her strength, as she's likened to the reigning god that transcends all matter. Her energy signature is described as being so insurmountably massive that it causes many of the humans within the caverns to go mad, any monsters are immensely strengthened, and even Shinra's robots seem to have life breathed into them. Before moving on, I feel like I have to clarify that Minerva driving people mad and having proximity to Jenova's original crash site is not used as implication that she was a vector of the invader's virus. The men losing their minds are likely just suffering extreme Marco poisoning. Various fiends and soldiers have already been shown buffing themselves by absorbing lifestream, and the mechs coming alive could just be the same principle behind the Cetra's golems and automata. So, is Minerva the goddess then? Yes, but also no. Minerva may be the goddess spoken of in the original 5-part tale. It references her judgment arrow attack, or her being the one who guards the eternal waters of the Promised Land. Her mission title is the Reigning Deity, while the Crisis Core Complete Guide calls her an existence that transcends all matter, and further says Genesis fulfills his wish to meet her. So originally it should be pointing at Minerva. The imagery and storyline presented in Loveless G Edition, however, categorically is not. I don't think that this play's story is pure fiction, since Jenova is shown to have once worn that exact same attire that Jessie put on, which paints the entire thing as being based on recovered records or legends. But I think that there must be some historical confusion going on due to Jenova having once adopted the form of Minerva in the sinful city of Guardia. Could I comment more on the goddess from Loveless G Edition as it pertains to Jenova? Loveless is an ancient poem foretelling of a goddess and her divine gift. I think the Loveless G Edition performed in the Gold Saucer should be at least loosely based on lost Cetran history. There's a lot of fascinating stuff here with the implications about a mechanical city, a hero, a hellhound, and a dragon king that are all largely lost to time. Introducing the setting, Kate Sith exclaims, "A mechanical metropolis built of blood, sweat, and gears, the city of Guardia, an insatiable machine devoid of pity. neighbours on all sides fell victim to its hunger while it grew larger and ever more powerful. The whirlwind of conquest swept up many, including him. Alfred was the traveller's name. In search of the goddess's blessing, he had journeyed forth alone. I guess the big question is whether Loveless is based on Jenova's actions in a long-forgotten era, or whether Jenova pulled inspiration from that tale. As mentioned prior, Jenova in the Temple of the Ancients has an appearance that is identical to Jess's outfit when she's cast as the goddess of Guardia. A similar angel statue was observed in the Nebel Manor, and Hojo mentioned that he briefly looked into Loveless, wondering if it might have aided in his Jenova project research. That overlap in design is the main point to anchor off of. Decoding the rest of the Loveless G Edition performance can be a little confusing at first, because it's hard to tell where the dramatizations begin and end, or how much of it is to be taken as true. The intro appears to show the goddess losing her wings and falling in love with a human hero. This would be wildly out of step with Minerva's nature, yet for the shapeshifter you could at least suggest that, well, maybe this was her way of manipulating that warrior to partake in her campaign of violence. Particularly, I think we might use that to address Rosa. The intro, which is more metaphorical, depicts the goddess losing her wings and seducing 3 friends. The story section does frame Princess Rosa as a separate character since she, Alfred, and Varvados use phrases like goddess above or extend prayers to the goddess. But her outfit is clearly just a loosely disguised version of the goddess's, retaining the Minerva-like headband and now wearing a similar 7-point crown as depicted in one of the Jenova murals. So I might surmise that Jenova shifted into Rosa as her next deception after the goddess, or that Rosa was assimilated by her cells. Rosa's staff is also very obviously that same one which Jenova is depicted wielding in the Northwood murals. Guardia I could very easily imagine being a legitimate city that once existed under Jenova's governance as well. Specifically, Guardia was probably a human city, since the Cetra showed this appearance when describing that she had been named Jenova after their own demise. So the connection there might be that Guardia is the specific city that Jenova descended upon to seed enmity for the Cetra, as described in the Hall of Murals. Its tale of callous rule and ever-expanding conquest are totally in line with her ambitions, and directly parallel the fable of the Shadow Blood Queen. Introducing Jenova as the holy goddess of Guardia and the malign Shadow Blood Queen in the same game is a rather deliberate signposting of things. So it's like, I don't know, is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth telling me that Jenova landed at the city of Guardia instead of the North Cave? It almost seems like the 3 friends could be symbolic stand-in for the 3 races known to have lived on the surface, who perhaps agreed or were convinced to summon the celestial entity Jenova with only a vague understanding that she might grant them immortality. Act 1 recounts, 1 becomes a hero, 1 wanders the land, and the last is taken prisoner. Humanity would be the hero, since they, for better or worse, are the ones to receive Jenova's gift and come to act as her emissaries. The Cetra might be that which wanders the Earth, since they're almost entirely slaughtered and returned to the planet's flow, while the Gi would be those told to be captured due to them being locked in their village. In fact, with the recently released English localization of the Material Ultimania, which I really had planned to publish this video well before the blog post went up like midway into last year, the official translation of staff comments on the murals does possibly imply that Jenova may have landed at the temple. They say, the mural on the top left depicts the clash between the soldiers and mages. The Temple of the Ancients sits between them. The mural underneath relates the story of the soldiers and mages fighting back against Jenova following its arrival, only to find it possesses the power of mimicry. I'm not entirely convinced of their wording and the mural depiction though, because the North Crater crash site is still shown to exist in the story like it did in the original. That just doesn't feel entirely right though. It's not like Guardia could have been the original site where the meteor impacted to create the Great Northern Crater, because we see that Jenova seems to have presided over it for quite a while, given that it was her main vehicle for eradicating the Cetra. The Final Fantasy Remake World Preview art book, if it's still accurate to the project, details Jenova as having landed at Null's Pole in the known vicinity of the crater and in accordance with FF7's original explanation, rather than Guardia. The North Crater still exists, and the claim that Jenova might have preemptively ejected herself from the meteor for her humanoid form to land in Northwood, although it sounds like a small change because the meteorite could still hit further up north, it is a pretty stark departure from the tale we have always had about her. I can entertain it, I can attack it, but I cannot commit to it without simply having Revelation in my hands and seeing how Ghast and Ifalna present it this time around. I wouldn't agree with Jenova being the origin point for the whole Loveless legend though, since Minerva and the goddess Materia are both legitimate and should predate Jenova's presence on the planet. Genesis's conclusions reveal the so-called reigning deity Minerva to be the goddess, and the supplementary material seems to support him in that. As I said in the last topic, maybe it's just the simple matter of a confusion and dilution of stories over thousands of years, where the G-Edition writers might be conflating the real tale of the Lifestream's goddess and the evil angel that once descended upon the City of Sin. How many champions has Jenova had in the past? Including my own conspiracies, we have information to identify 5, with another 2 under great scrutiny. The earliest we might know of would be Ginatark. As mentioned prior, there's an undeniable visual overlap from remake Jenova to Yevon and Unaleska, who established Spira's cycle of sacrifice. I'll look at that in more detail later, but I might theorize that one or both are actually Jenova's thralls. Then once she comes to Gaia, her earliest warrior hinted at would be Alfred, whom she seduced upon conquering the northern capital of Guardia. Masamune in southern Wutai is afflicted with her curse 1500 years after her arrival. In current day, she's been seen vying for control of Angeal and Sephiroth, but both have rejected her control. The Shadowblood Queen is Jenova? Yeah, 100% that is Jenova. Many seem to have missed it, perhaps due to the fragmented nature of Lidrell's flashbacks and the lack of her commonly expected purple glow. But I don't see any reading where that isn't Jenova. Let's recap Lidrell's fable. Once there lives a queen of peerless beauty and compassion. She loved her people, and in turn they loved her. But one day, a change came over the queen. In a blink of an eye, her love turned to hate, her compassion to cruelty. Fair and beauteous though she remained, her heart became black as pitch. Conquest was now her cause, her subjects mere fodder to feed her boundless ambition. And so her kingdom grew as her subjects perished. Until that is, a ray of hope appeared, a sorceress who would be their salvation. The Emerald Witch, they called her. And with her arcane powers, she led the people into rebellion, captured the queen and put her to death. Yet from the tyrant's body spilled blood as dark as shadow, and from this wicked ichor, the myriad fiends of the world were born. And that is the story of the Shadowblood Queen. Some call it a parable, a myth, a fairy tale, and I wish it were, but she is as real as you and I, and she is coming. Her resurrection is nigh. Reading between the lines, this is the tale of Jenova replacing the queen of a Cetran settlement in Gongaga, specifically the ruins where we find Regina when possessed, and using brutality to grow her political influence. The Emerald Witch, perhaps Minerva, manages to defeat the Shadowblood Queen, but Jenova's infection spreads throughout the land and creates monsters. Lidrell's visions all have the usual Jenova haze in his room, and the final chapter sees him approached by one of the Black Robes, then being converted himself. When the Shadowblood Queen possesses Regina, she refers to Cloud as a puppet. After being defeated, Vincent says, "Evil like that preys on our deepest, darkest fears and worms its way into our hearts," which is similar to the line that Sephiroth and Cloud repeat about Jenova becoming those you fear, those you hate, those you love. Narratively, I am convinced that the Shadowblood Queen was the body snatcher Jenova. The haunted hotel, where Lidrell's tainted spirit somehow manifests, contains a painting of a cloaked figure approaching a mysterious red artifact. Perhaps this relates to the Shadow Blood Queen, though I haven't yet managed to identify this specific set of rocks in Gongaga. Is it possible that, since we only ever see this Jenova woman under intense blue-green lighting, her model was coloured this way so as to appear blue when presented in its cinematic lighting? I mean, that certainly is possible. Ever Crisis takes the Rebirth model and makes it match the original colours, though it has also been altered with features like the eye stalks that are absent on the new rendition, and there are a lot of blue-skinned Jenova mutations. I do tend to be conscious of the fact that sometimes colour is representative, right? Artistically applied in a way where surrounding colours cause one colour to become contextually perceived as another. Like how Chris from Symphogear has white hair, yet if you go into Photoshop and eyedropper that, you'd actually get purple. But her hair is definitely intended to be recognised as white, and they somehow use the adjacent colours to lead you into perceiving it as such. Similarly, I did think of the possibility that Jenova may have been coloured through that kind of principle. The intense lighting of the Mako tank does tint her skin, and you have to break past it in FreeCam to find out that she's an ash grey. However, with both of these scenes, once you know that her model is grey, I think you can kind of see past the lighting and recognise that it's grey skin under a blue or green light, and in no view is her eye ever pink. Both mural appearances also depict her skin as grey. As far as I know, this would also be the only instance of such a design decision happening in the FF7 remake games. In my time replaying and obsessively screenshotting them, I've not once encountered a boss model where I felt that its palette had been altered to accommodate that kind of lighting-colour interaction. Jenova's skin largely is grey, and that is important to something else very important. All the same, however, there are so many blue Jenova offsprings. Plus her lips and the tips of some of her fingers do turn a deeper blue. I know this sounds like a contradiction or a cop-out, but I'll probably account for both as I move forward. If Jenova was a monster when excavated, why did Professor Gast describe her as smiling with ethereal grace? Gast seemed like the only reasonable scientist on the Jenova project. Were the video clips we see metaphorical rather than literal? It's my opinion that this is just a common cosmic horror trope where the disgusting alien god twists perception, or the self-important humans project their own meaning upon the incomprehensible other, so as to be perceived as a thing of sexual beauty and grace. Like Ash remarking on how beautiful and perfect the xenomorph is in Alien. Something something Song of Sire. Or like the disturbing contrast of the Jenova Lifeclinger demon having these colourful butterfly wings. It's grotesque and sinister, yet the scientist with his misguided belief gazes into her uncomfortably gentle eyes and believes that she has chosen him to spread the truth of the ancients throughout the world. To me, that's the vibe I get from Gus describing the specimen as smiling with ethereal grace. It's like a sick chill running down my spine. Final Fantasy VII has always been a cosmic horror story where a good man falls into madness after contact with a Lovecraftian entity, but the remake games heighten that sense way further with all the body horror. While Gast may have been the most humane scientist in the Jenova project, it's not like he's some blameless apostle. Perhaps those innocent hopes are precisely what drove him to become compliant in the terrible experiments. Professor Gast initially headed the Jenova project believing that she was a Cetra, then abandoned Shinra when he figured out that she wasn't, and therefore he'd been testing on babies and soldiers for nothing. An excerpt from the Crisis Core Ultimania scenario Q&A clarifies that Gast was still the overseer of the Jenova project when the G and S branches began. Even if he had little active involvement in either, he still didn't stop them. But I guess that is a fair enough point to query, whether that demonic Jenova form they excavated could even smile, since at first glance, the remake versions of Jenova do all seem to be lacking a jaw. However, upon closer inspection of the models at key moments, as well as referencing some concept art, Jenova has been shown steadily growing a mouth. Dreamweaver certainly does not have one. Jenova Emergent, however, has a hidden mouth with an eye in it. And for just a few seconds, Jenova Lifeklinger opens up a gigantic mouth while roaring in pain during its final phase. The Genesis copies also retain the jaw as their faces become increasingly bone-like. And keep in mind that all of those are mutations progressing over the span of weeks. The body which the Jenova project team excavated is one that had over 1,000 years to perfect its form. So I'm sure that one, with its humanoid arms and hands, probably had a mouth as well. The Lake of Blood also has a hidden face carving that resembles a twisted version of Jenova's skull with sharp fangs. What we can see of its mouth is a little unclear. It could be a top and bottom row of teeth, or the top half could just be stony gums, with the bottom row actually being its top layer of teeth. Given how the canines at the side blend more obviously into the head's texture, I'm inclined to believe the latter, that we're only looking at bony lips and top teeth here. Perhaps they're deliberately hiding this Jenova's full form from us, since I have my suspicions it may have some rather distinctive horns. This scene is a pre-rendered FMV, so I unfortunately can't just zoom it out with FreeCam. However, those hands are visibly sitting on the same rock strata where she was uncovered, so I'm inclined to believe it was a legitimate flashback showing that Jenova wasn't a humanoid woman when excavated. Ghast is adamant that this Jenova is a she, which might seem odd at first, but actually every Jenova design except for probably Emergent has had breasts. Since the hands are more humanoid than usual, I'd think it's a safe bet that this one did too. Look, it is a possibility that Ghast wasn't present for the actual excavation, and maybe Jenova had shapeshifted into a woman by the time that he first gazes upon her. Regardless, I just don't personally feel Rebirth framed that scene as something to be interpreted or doubted. I don't like the suggestion that Rebirth shows us and Sephiroth a vision of a demon when Shinra had in reality dug up a woman. Why would Jenova show that image to Sephiroth? She wants him to believe that she's his mother, not a monster. No, that's footage recorded on proper film reel by the research team. Then a few seconds later, we do see the female Jenova flashing into his mind without any such overlays as she begins to latch onto him from the mountaintop. That same film reel effect is also seen in the intro cinematic of the First Soldier's original Battle Royale, when it's showing the early origins of the Jenova and Soldier program. These are my thoughts on the matter anyway. I know throwing all that out kind of reads as if I'm coping, but to me, yeah, I've always thought that the ethereal grace line was laced with cosmic horror irony. Why does Sephiroth respect Ghast? The date ranges surrounding the Jenova project are vague, so have they ever actually met? That is a good question, mate. We honestly don't know a great deal about Professor Ghast. He hasn't had much presence in the extended content or prequels beyond offhand remarks like a Cosmo Canyon NPC mentioning that he used to frequent the Vale. The only significant instance I can really think of is in Maiden Who Travels the Planet, when Aerith encounters Hojo's Jenova-infused soul within the lifestream during the endgame. Hojo says, "Now this proves I have far surpassed Ghast, who was recognized for his talent even though he tried to flee from science like the coward he was. If Ghast was in charge of the Jenova project now, he surely never would have reached this stage." Aerith responds, "Father realized that the planet was more important than science." Hojo retorts, "That was the limit of Ghast. Stopping and not doing what remained to be done was blasphemy to science." FF7 originally frames Ghast as the opposing element to Mad Dr. Hojo, so Sephiroth of all characters being fond of him is easy to understand. And yet, this intersection of characters is actually one of the stranger oddities in FF7 and Crisis Core dialogue. These games are a bit unique compared to a lot of other series in that we do have specific years and dates attached to quite a lot of things in the compilation chronology. A Q&A in the Crisis Core scenario Ultimania is as follows. Question: what is the time difference between the start of Jenova Project S and Jenova Project G? And out of Genesis, Sephiroth and Angeal, is Genesis the eldest? Answer: Project S and Project G began at roughly the same time. They were led by Hojo and Hollander respectively, and the department head Ghast has little participation in either project. The order of their births go Angelin-Genesis, then Sephiroth, but it's fine to think of them as being around the same age. Angeal and Genesis were created at roughly the same time and were deemed as failure projects when they were babies. Project S took the results from Project G and added further improvements, so Sephiroth's birth was later than Angeal and Genesis. However, the information you can find will only provide a date range of 1977 to 1982 for the births of Genesis, Angeal, and Sephiroth, as well as the departure of Gast, covering the general span of the original Jenova project. If you're only looking at that calendar, it's left ambiguous if Sephiroth could have even met Gast, which can introduce a lot of confusion, especially when Rebirth even seems to have deliberately played down their connection by having Sephiroth only speak of him as a great scientist rather than any implied personal connection. And personally, I do feel like having their births represent the late stage of the Jenova project outcomes would be more fluent. But actually, I would say that yes, there is enough information present in the compilation to justify them somewhat knowing each other. Sephiroth's birthday requires a bit of finagling, so I'll start with Gast because his years are a lot simpler and it's helpful to have them already in mind while I find my footing with Sephiroth. In the originally presented timelines from the Ultimania, Gast is only stated as fleeing from Shinra somewhere in the 1977 to 1982 time period. The Final Fantasy VII Remake World Preview Artbook does conclusively list Gast's stop point at 1977, but I think that book might just be incorrectly formatted because Gast's departure and Vincent's metamorphosis are both shifted up a block from where they are literally everywhere else. If we return to the actual in-game dialogue, Hojo says that he waited 2 years before deciding to march on Gast's home. It was a pretty casual mention, so giving the phrase 2 years a colloquial 6 months lenience, that means Gast leaving Shinra has a date range of September 1982 to March 1983. Considering that the timelines all slot that into the 1977 to 1982 time period, I might even choose to cap it further where it's only September 1982 to December 1982. For simplicity's sake, I'll evaluate it as December 31st, 1982. All things considered, solving for Gast is easy. Sephiroth, however, needs us to pore over the calendars a bit more closely, and we can really only manage to tighten our focus by about 10 months. For starters, Sephiroth's birth cannot have been in 1977, as Jenova itself was only discovered that year, sometime before July. A diary entry from Grimoire discusses Shinra locating another Cetra artifact. This is referring to Jenova, which was only verified as an ancient on July 7, 1977. He then goes on to say that a new large-scale research project regarding this artifact will be beginning soon, and that his assistant Lucrezia has been invited to take part. So Hojo and Lucrezia definitively were not around each other prior to the Jenova project's commencement on September 13, 1977, meaning that Sephiroth definitively cannot have been born in 1977 either. Fast forward 9 months, and the earliest possible date that Sephiroth could have been born, if she got pregnant right from the get-go, would be June 1978. Though we can also push that back just a smidge further, because the 10th anniversary Ultimania reveals Vincent to have been somewhere in his 20s when he was sent to Nibelheim. His date of birth is given as roughly 50 years prior to FF7, i.e. 1957. And this is substantiated by multiple timelines indicating him to have been 27 in 1984. So Vincent was born October 13th, 1957, and he's 27 in 1984, meaning that for him to have been at least 20 at the time of arrival, his earliest start date is October 13th, 1977. Lucrezia was not yet pregnant at this time. So, imagining that she got pregnant soon after his arrival, that would further delay the span of Sephiroth's birth to July 1978. Technically, we're only told that Vincent was in his 20s when he arrived, not that he was 20. We know concretely that he was 27 in 1984, But because we only have him being between the ages of 20 and 27 at Nibelheim, it's not exactly stated that he arrived in 1977 when he was 20. He was only in his 20s, and Sephiroth is born December 31st, 1982 at the latest. So Vincent's arrival actually could have been anywhere between October 13th, 1977 and March 31st, 1982. I'm just assuming that Vincent was hired to protect her at the start of the project because that makes the most logical and calculable sense. He might actually have been employed there at a later date after Lucrezia became a high-profile employee because of Hojo accosting her for Project S, since we don't know any of the other scientists to have had a personal bodyguard like she did, but there's no way to verify that. And yet, June 1978, 9 months after the project began, still feels a bit too soon for Sephiroth to have been born. It's difficult to believe that Lucrezia had volunteered at such an early stage, because she spends enough time together with Vincent for him to become infatuated with her and eventually profess his feelings. This distresses Lucrezia since she felt immense guilt over the death of his father Grimoire. And in a bid to push Vincent away, that is what makes her volunteer to mother Project S. The largest part of her history with Vincent happens before Sephiroth is born. So the key dates we end up with are July 7, 1977, Jenova verified as a Cetra. September 13, 1977, the Jenova project begins. After October 13, 1977, Vincent arrives to Nibelheim, Lucrezia is not yet pregnant. After July 1978, Sephiroth is born. Between September and December of 1982, Gast goes into hiding. After October 13, 1984, Hojo experiments on Vincent. Lucrezia stabilizes him with the Chaos gene and then goes into hiding. February 27, 1985, Hojo assassinates Gast. September 1992, Sephiroth's first field assignment. September 22, 2002, the Nibelheim incident begins. Therefore, at maximum, Sephiroth is 14 in Ever Crisis, 22 at the start of Crisis Core, and 24 at the time of the Nibelheim incident. Yes, you heard me right. Angeal has the face of someone who is 22 or less, apparently. With his earliest possible birthday being July 1978, Sephiroth could have been 4.5 at most by the time that Gast disappeared. But I don't think that's a realistic date because Vincent and Lucrezia must have spent a not insignificant amount of time together prior to the commencement of Project S, and Sephiroth only gets younger as that drags out. Maybe he had developed enough of an actual consciousness to become fond of Gast by that point, but part of me also thinks he would have been far too little to be cognizant of it. Even if Toddleroth had liked Papa Gast, his remarks about the professor's scientific prowess in Rebirth are something he couldn't have realized at that age. Perhaps Sephiroth was simply an understated bookworm. Crisis Core does have 2 separate instances of Sephiroth secluding himself in a Shinra library, so maybe he became familiar with Gast's scientific accolades there and began to perceive him as a better man than Hojo. Any information that Sephiroth had managed to obtain about Gast would have been heavily sanitized. He's shown diving into Shinra's research archives and yet is unable to uncover that Hojo is his father, Lucrezia is his mother, or that he's a lab baby. Sephiroth could not have discovered the real nature of Gast's involvement with the Jenova project in his reading at Shinra HQ. Those archives obviously would have been censored so that any unassuming reader couldn't just wander in and randomly discover the circumstances of alien existence. And all the research documentation in the Nibel Manor is from the time where Gast and the team still believed that Jenova was a Cetra, hence why Sephiroth accepts himself to be one. Rufus still believes that Sephiroth is an ancient in FF7 around December 2007, but Hojo in Crisis Core, April of 2001, calls Genesis a memento from an unenlightened era, where men could deem any unclassified lifeform an ancient. So even though the Jenova project team did figure out that Jenova wasn't an ancient, the project's content and outcomes aren't common knowledge within Shinra at all. Rebirth, I would say, fixes this inconsistency a bit. While FF7 and Crisis Core both have Sephiroth expressing sadness that Ghast had never told him anything about his birth, implying that he was quite personally familiar with Ghast, Rebirth just has Sephiroth musing about how Hojo was an unworthy successor as the head of R&D. Then when Sephiroth goes mad on his final day in the basement, there's a wrath in his voice when he mocks himself as the crowning glory of Professor Ghast's wondrous experiment, not expressing a mournful, personal betrayal like FF7's depiction. So just to reiterate, yes, Sephiroth could have feasibly met Ghast, but he'd have been at such a young age that really most of his actual knowledge of the man's accolades or character likely come from time spent immersed in the Shinra archives. However, while his connection with Ghast might be in a dubious position due to his young mind, Rebirth did quietly imply that Vincent was around Sephiroth during early childhood. In the original game, he claims to have some kind of personal tie to Sephiroth, but this seemed more so just because of his story with Lucrezia. But the new expansions have him confess that he had many chances to pull the trigger on Sephiroth, but couldn't bring himself to hurt Lucrezia's child. So honestly, I'm really excited to see what might be done with that in Revelation. How will Sephiroth interact with Vincent if he's one of his few living connections after Ghast and Glenn perished? How will Jenova interact with Chaos? I'm so curious. Is the symbol on the back of the reunion cloak the same as Jecht's tattoo? No. The Zanuck and Abe's logo, reunion cloaks, the insignia of Beck's badasses, Vincent's Cerberus emblem and the Galleon Beast's chest adornment all look somewhat similar, but that's, for the moment, totally coincidental. The image on the reunion cloak is likely just a very loose interpretation of Jenova Dreamweaver's shape. What do the symbols on Bugenhagen and Nanaki represent? Not a single clue, my guy. It looks vaguely similar in design to one of the Cetron armbands, which may account for something, but it's probably just Cosmo Canyon's Watcher insignia. Since we don't know Planet Gi's actual name, could this secretly be Spira even? I'm going to proceed under the assumption that it is not, because nothing of the Gi's culture or the way they carry themselves echoes Spirin's from the Eternal Calm. But it certainly is something to think about. Jenova, they remodeled her, made her face near identical to Unalesca. Sephiroth finds her with her hair going crazy like Unalesca. She newly has red spirit energy like Unalesca. The Jenova monster's face has been remodeled to a more humanoid skull with sharp teeth, like Unalesca. The murals that depict Jenova's arrival to Gaia do feature symbols that visually resemble those found in Yevon religion, and rotating them in the right way lets them reach a point where they do liken to the Yevonite characters for darkness and fire found on Seymour Omnis's wheels. I don't know what this symbol actually means since we don't have a key for the Cetron alphabet like we do those on Spira, but it does also appear at the altars in the temple. However, the time frame for Jenova's arrival and that of the Spirins doesn't coincide in my mind, and I dislike the implication that Spira was destroyed. The Gi's star waned and was subsumed by Gaia an eternity ago. We don't know when the Spirins arrived, but we do know that their one real aim was establishing the Shinra Company in search of Mako energy, discovered in 1959. Meaning that the Gi's arrival predates that of the Spirins by a massive span of time. Based on what we've been told about Shinra, it'd have to happen at least 1,000 years after 10-2, so all the main cast are long gone. But the thought of one game's world being blown up as a backstory for another, especially in an anthology series like Final Fantasy, just doesn't sit right. Rather than say the Gi are Spirins or that Jenova is an Aeon, I would feel more comfortable with the claim that Jenova might have descended upon the cursed apostle Yu Yevon and his daughter Unalesca. Together, they would then shape the world history of Spira under Jenova's guidelines. When Sin fires its blast, the cutscene zooms out to space and we can see that something had previously damaged the moon. Might it be that Jenova landed on the moon, grabbed a hunk of rock, then hurtled toward the planet as a meteorite? While Jenova's cells always move toward reunion, its spirit has displayed the ability to stay fragmented, such as the Shadow Blood Queen, the Blighted Spirit, or Masamune. Perhaps what remained on Spira was one such splinter of her will. These are reasons why I say that no, it shouldn't be. Spira is a secondary planet that we know exists somewhere out there in the distant reaches of the galaxy, and the writers were clearly being cheeky when they had Ginatark say, "Liberate us from this endless dream," as that line obviously has FF10 DNA in it. FF10's story is all about the endless dreams of the Faith, and how their souls are progressively woken in order to take spirit energy away from sin. I do see the idea where you could use that suggestion to galvanize a link between Unalesca, Sin, and Jenova, or to explain the state of Ginatark's existence in that he would explicitly become considered an unsent. But the Albed's gas masks, goggles, beige skin, spiral eyes, and blonde hair did not evolve into skull masks, blue skin, pink eyes, and black hair over the untold generations which separate FF10 and FF7. Remake directly shows us the Albed who formed Shinra, and he still looks just like his forefather. We don't officially have any word on what the name of the Gi tribe's planet was. However, if we look to other Final Fantasy games for trends or precedent, I would think it a safe bet to dub the other planet Terra. Just as Final Fantasy IX's homeworld was called Gaia and its alien partner known as Terra, I would like to administer that name to the Gi's homeworld as well. This is purely my own assumption, but the name Terra will actually become something of utmost importance once I finally begin to hone in on my conclusions. Moving forward, I will be writing Terra instead of Planet Gi, but do keep in mind that I have entirely made this up myself. FF7's planet is named Gaia? I've known it to be Gaia all this time, and never even realized that was a point of contention. Not sure where I first heard it, considering the name Gaia turns out to have never been uttered in any of the game scripts, but the FF Wiki sources some external instances of the name being used. The only two in-game examples are the Gaia's Cliffs region and the Gaia Malboro which inhabit them. Promotional blurbs for Advent Children or Dirge of Cerberus, and intertextual bio stuff like the Final Fantasy 25th Anniversary site or Final Fantasy All the Bravest cite the planet's name as Gaia. The actual scripts of the game only refer to it as the planet, not Gaia. For what it's worth, they don't really refer to it as Earth either. Any mention of Earth in the remake series is just referring to Earth as in the ground, not the name of the planet. Gi and Cetra both speak of calamity visited upon the Earth, yet they're referring to totally different worlds. The Cetra proclaim, "The meteor shall fall, sundering the skies and shattering the Earth," while Ginatark recalls, "The Earth shook, seas boiled, skies shattered, and time stopped." I will continue to refer to the planet as Gaia in discussion, since there are more examples upholding this, and that's just how I've always understood FF7. It's actually kind of a shock realizing how sparse the name Gaia really is. I would like to retain this Terra idea too, since it's fun, and that necessitates the green planet being called Gaia. Terra isn't needed in order to sustain any of my conclusions. I just like the symbolism of having Gaia and Terra. Ties it up neatly. For what it's worth, even if we do take away Gaia and revert it to simply the planet, then the Cetra's planet and the Gi's planet do still have another part of their lexicon which positions them as counterparts like the names Gaia and Terra would. We have names attached to their differing soul material, which are counterpart terms. Gaian lifestream is anima, Gi lifestream is animus. But I'll discuss that in more detail a few points down. How many planets do we know of within FF7's universe? Abiding by canon, I would say 10, but abiding by my own thoughts and dreams, that number would swell to 12 plus. We specifically know of Gaia and Spira. I'm assuming that Terra was a genuine planet elsewhere in the galaxy too, not just an overlapping plane of spacetime. I'd think those are all in separate solar systems though. The Dirge of Cerberus official complete guide's terminology section describes Jenova as an intelligent life form whose home lies beyond the heavens, and the Mobius Final Fantasy cards also allude to her having a genuine homeworld somewhere in remote space as well. Models of the Gaian solar system can be found in Bugenhagen's Cosmo Observatory. The first floor has a small model with 5 planets and a large model with 4 planets. His full-scale planetarium, from what I could identify, features 7 planets orbiting around the Sun, which aligns to one of the sketches on his blackboard. Gaia, a ringed planet, a dwarf planet, and then planets embodying the elements of fire, electricity, ice, and what I assume to be water. The water planet does look strangely like Jenova Lifeklinger and the Twin Brain, but I'm just taking that to be nothing. Jenova is a deep space parasite, possibly interdimensional. No shot her homeworld is just next door. The red one shouldn't be Terra either. There are also a few more planets in the Galactic Saviors minigame, though with no further identification as to whether they correlate to Bugenhagen's research or information from Shinra's space department. The Utisa Tower also has something that might be a planetarium with a few more planets around Spira, but that's only speculation for now. I will also mention that, due to clear and deliberate repetition of key imagery, I do have my own theories that Final Fantasy XIII-3's universal reset may be that which gives rise to the cosmos of Spira and Gaia. So if I factored that in, then Claire's new homeworld would also exist out there somewhere. Type 0, however, occupies a different realm and isn't quite real so much as an experimental space created by the fal'Cie, so it would simply be wiped out once that experiment ends rather than being carried into the new universe. I'm also not averse to folding in Chrono Trigger as well, for similarities in its invader and planetary consciousness, though I'll discuss that in full far later in the piece. So those are 2 theoretical bumps to the final count. For now though, I would stick to the more concrete 10 which are observed to exist across FF7 and FF10. Sephiroth's supernova in the original shows a giant comet ploughing through all the planets from our own real-life solar system. But supernova is an attack existing inside of its own subdimension like the Bahamut summons, and the presence of real planet names is not really to be taken as anything literal. There was one interview where Kitase answered yes when asked if FF7 was meant to be our Earth after some crazy nuclear accident. But I would suggest he was speaking in concept or in regards to its motivations and aesthetic. The world history and stellar arrangement doesn't support that at all. Just a reminder, our solar system has 8 planets and recognizes 5 dwarf planets. Theirs only contains 7, one of which might be a dwarf planet. How many extraterrestrial races do we know of on Gaia? 3, possibly 4. So the Cetra were the original native custodians of Gaia. The humans, as far as we know, are also a native people that evolved out of certain Cetran settlements who gave up their nomadic lives and slowly lost their sense for the lifestream. The Gi tribe arrived from planet Terra and should predate the humans by a great deal of time. An eternity at most, many millennia at least. Jenova, of course, is an alien invader as well, who landed at the North Pole 2,000 years ago. Then there are the descendants of the Albed genius Shinra and their interstellar employees. We don't know when or where Spirans arrived to Gaia, only that it must be when the humans were already well and truly established. As the higher end, we could say that they might be hundreds of years removed, since Sid is unfamiliar with the enigmatic culture who originally developed the airship he excavated and retooled as the Shera, most likely Spirans. But their history probably can't extend much further than a couple hundred years, since the Shinra company has no indication of being millennia old, given that they came to Gaia specifically in pursuit of Marco energy, and we know that Shinra only finally located it on September 23, 1959. The longest I can imagine is like 200 or 300 years. There are numerous other extraterrestrial visitations only hinted upon by Hojo in Maiden Who Travels the Planet. But the potential of a fourth eye sighted is because the Ultimania introduction for Vincent does describe Chaos as a legendary alien life form. And Lucrezia's thesis further explains it to be one of the sentient xenoforms that reside among us. That doesn't 100% mean that it's an off-world creature. She could just be describing it as an uncanny non-human entity. But I have some thoughts on this matter that I will return to in a great deal of time. chaos is quite the point of interest, more than you might realize. The village of the Gi, Nibelheim, and North Crater all share these jagged mountain ranges. Is this indicative of Jenova terraforming the planet? Much as I'd like to say yes, probably not. These jagged rocks are also glimpsed when Tifa falls into the lifestream and within the chamber of the goddess materia where reigning deity Minerva resides. She's basically the living embodiment of Gaia's lifestream, so these rock formations are therefore likely just natural growth in areas of extreme Marco concentration. What are the roots which appear when Sephiroth draws out the true black materia? It might be the same sort of growth as the big tree in the City of the Ancients, and resembles the roots in the North Crater which are holding Sephiroth's crystallized body. It also vaguely reminds me of that red material which Sephiroth uses to trap Holy at the heart of the planet. Therefore, I don't think it's meant to be the tentacles of some massive higher dimensional Jenova body or anything of that manner. Hojo does excitedly ask, has it finally begun, when he sees Sephiroth spread this structure and summon the black materia, which could point it in the direction of Jenova's reunion, and we do see the Jenova-infused Roche violently reacting to its summoning. But that's a big claim about the future trajectory of FF7 Remake's Jenova which I cannot comfortably make without Part 3. What kind of material this is composed of, by what mechanic it manifests, or what reality interaction its appearance is intended to signify, I haven't managed to get a genuine read on. We don't know enough about Remake's reunion or black materia yet. Are Jenova and the Gi tribe connected? I'm trying to arrange this as sequentially as I feasibly can, but some conclusions are impossible to convey without either skipping forward or looping discussions around on themselves, so it's here that I must begin to reveal my position. Yes. Although I had originally written most of this post concluding to the counter due to two of the most core overlaps in their imagery that I feel fall short, Gi Natak's colour scheme and Meteor, I've now become convinced that they share some connection. There are one or two pieces of information we might need to bend in order to achieve this, but the line of thinking which I have arrived at after properly working through my findings is that the Gi tribe and Jenova are linked in some manner, whether biological, historical, or cultural. I think that it requires some theory, some conspiracy, some blind assumption, but I have a scenario that I like now. It might not be the simplest interpretation, but I believe that I can explain and then support it based on the imagery in Rebirth and how it interacts with some symbols from the original Final Fantasy VII. Jenova and the Gi tribe surely have a pre-existing cultural connection before coming to Gaia, and have almost definitely shared some degree of prior genetic contact. Rebirth Jenova's colour scheme means that it is not as simple as just claiming them to be the same species, but I believe that we can make this work nonetheless. Perhaps the Gi are not her direct descendants or native people, as that would betray Jenova's unknowable cosmic identity, but has she influenced their evolutionary history? For reasons that I'm still working my way toward, I have come to feel that Jenova must have had a significant impact on their biological or social evolution. I'd say that this is where the Lavos inspiration in her concept design is being brought back in full force. That Jenova was hiding on their planet for, say, 65 million years or so while steering the growth of life on their world and drinking of their lifestream. There are still plenty of other elements to the FF7 scenario I must first introduce, but I did mention Lavos, right? Let's do that then. Let's implicate Jenova's history through comparison. Not to Lavos, or at least not yet, but to Deus. Gentlemen, it is time for your 10 AM Xenogears lore dump. Well, yet another stalled script finds itself just kinda grafted onto this Gi tribe megapost. Xenogears o'clock indeed. While my original plan was to title that post Finding Xenogears in Final Fantasy VII's remakes, if I ever published it, for this focused subsection I would now instead title my essay Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, The Animus and the Mother. I do see the Gi tribe having a symbolic exchange with a particular group and their storyline from Xenogears, and these parallels can be used to A. solidify some evolutionary oversight from Jenova, and B. explain something which I noticed the Gi using in my first Rebirth playthrough and have been trying to mentally situate ever since: animus. If Jenova had created, or even just influenced the evolution of, the Gi tribe, then there would actually be a really awesome Xenogears reference in it, which is something that I have personal biases in favour of. First point of context is to introduce that FF7 and Xenogears are two sides of one coin. The story goes that after Chrono Trigger, Square had opened up for staff to submit their suggestions for the upcoming 7th Final Fantasy. Tetsuya Takahashi and his wife Soraya Saga sent in their idea, which kind of continued the themes of ancient DNA aliens from Chrono Trigger. If you know anything about his work, you know that this type of iteration and homage becomes Takahashi's calling card. Their pitch got approved and was put in use for a period of FF7's development, before the people in charge decided that it wasn't actually appropriate for the Final Fantasy series due to its tone, content, and length. Xenogears, infamously, is really quite long and heavy on the reading, especially for a PS1 RPG. This story concept was next temporarily in use for Chrono 2, then swapped again to finally become Xenogears. However, it was still used for a period of all their developments. Chrono Trigger, FF7, Xenogears, and Chrono Cross all therefore have a lot of connective tissue in their character archetypes, plot developments, themes, and imagery. Lavos, Jenova, and Deus all crash to the planet from space, leaving a large impact crater behind. The creatures then hide themselves away to begin harvesting the genetic information of the people on the planet over thousands, if not millions of years. All three share the key imagery of the woman in a tank and evolve through similarly shaped forms, namely a round one, a tree-like form, and a humanoid, among numerous other parallels. At every turn you can see connection in FF7 and Xenogears. Their main protagonist and main antagonists essentially both have the same arc, told in minorly different ways due to a shift in setting and style. Or there are direct references, like a catatonic cloud mumbling lyrics from Small 2 of Pieces, and a poster of Tifa hanging somewhere in Solaris. But it runs deep throughout every part of both games. Any comparison you make between them carries a certain level of authority because they are genuinely two outcomes of one idea. Where this becomes relevant to the theory of Jenova possibly producing the Gi tribe is that in Xenogears, the mother of humanity creates the 12 original human men out of the Katamoni supercomputer's biological circuitry named Animus. There are 12 male Animus who seek to locate their accompanying female anima, whereupon they could recombine with the supercomputer and enable the interplanetary bioweapon Deus to be resurrected. The Gi likewise seem to be an all-male tribe of warriors, and the Gi Spectres use a move called Animus, where they empower themselves further with their red miasma. They didn't have this attack in the original FF7, and the red miasma is specifically highlighted by enemy intel. You want to know something that's just kinda neat? One way of reading Xenoblade Chronicles is that supercomputer core Numa processes green and gold anima ether, while supercomputer core Logos processes purple and red animus ether. Logos is eventually summoned in the form of Malos, who is himself Sephiroth derivative. I've talked about this before at length, where Jin and Malos are basically just Sephiroth divided into two characters who embody him as the fallen hero and his divine panic while searching for a stable identity. You know, Amalthus is his blue-skinned deceiver like Jenova. The fall of Torna runs parallel to the Nibelheim incident. Laura's imagery is based on Lucrezia, etc. It runs deep. In fact, there is Trinity Processor-esque imagery found in Cosmo Canyon that I wanted to joke about at some point. A similar motif to the processor appears on the ground of the Gears and Gambit subspace, and there are distinct green, red, and violet life streams floating in the underground river outside the village of the Gi. The Xenoblade things are just observations, but the Xenogears Animus parallels carry genuine implication due to the shared history it has with the FF7 property. You can use Xenogears to piece together motives for equivalent setting details of FF7 and vice versa. I believe that you can draw some rather strong parallels between Cain, leader of the Animus, and Ginatark. They're primitive or tribal leaders from a time of antiquity whose people are associated with the term Animus. Both wear distinctive skull masks. Cain is connected closely with the mother of humanity and Deus, whereas I'm here trying to determine if Ginatark is connected to Revenant Mother Jenova. Cain proclaims, "We are the people expelled from paradise and forced to live on the cruel surface of the earth." Ginatark laments that the death of his home planet has left the souls of his people stranded upon an unwelcoming world, considering their immortal toil a penance imposed by the planet for the sin of our existence. You can definitely see the animus in what he's saying. Cain's storyline centers around the mother of humanity and Deus. Jenova, meanwhile, is FF7's analogue to both of those beings. It's of particular note that the Jenova doll and Deus both share that blank, mask-like face. Rebirth even removed the lines from the Jenova doll's face so that it now better matches to Deus. There's a key shot of the mother within Katamoni's tube compartment that resembles Jenova in the Mount Nebel tank. Deus, to whom the mother is linked and whom shares its grey face with the Jenova doll, is also found in a blue tank at some stage. Krelian, who is Sephiroth's counterpart character, learns of the mother's existence and the fact that she has extraterrestrial origins. This inspires him to exceed his human limitations by traversing the path of Sephiroth through to God's dimension. Sephiroth, meanwhile, believes that the extraterrestrial Jenova is his mother. This eventually inspires his decision to replace his lost human identity by becoming God instead. And Rebirth even gives him access to a world tree space we could reasonably dub the Path of Sephiroth. So the decision to give the Gi access to Animus is a rather deep-seated reference to Xenogears and could be used to implicate them as Jenova's children in some manner of speaking. Once more, I don't know that I agree with them being her actual progeny in the same way that the Mother of Humanity outright created the Animus tribe. But this element being present in Gi terminology reinforces the thought that Jenova had some great influence over their planet's evolutionary history. The two entities have further similarities across multiple transformations and even their boss music. Jenova and Awakening both begin with the same rolling scales, and both honestly sound pretty inspired by Lavos Core. The Animus of Xenogears want to recombine with their anima to resurrect Deus. Sephiroth in FF7 Rebirth wants to use the black materia created through Animus to ultimately make whole his fragmented mother. The parallels are there. If we say that Jenova bears some genetic responsibility for the development of the Gi, just look at what we can do with it. It agrees with Xenogears on every level of the Animus and Mother imagery overlap. FF7 Remake has really upped its Xenogears DNA in a lot of areas, Kabbalistic divinity and phenomenon phase shift all throughout. So I am going to assert that the Gi tribe are one of them. By wielding the element of Animus, by resembling the skull mask of Cain, by lamenting the day in which they were expelled from paradise, I will claim that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has deliberately made the Gi tribe a story element analogous to Xenogears in order to hint toward their own origins and peek into the larger interplanetary history of Jenova. Not that it necessarily matters at this stage of separation, but I will also point out that Unalesca's Jenova-like tentacles are also the spitting image of Cain's skull mask, with the golden colour and glowing eyes set inside dark holes. We've identified Animus. What about Anima? There is a single species of enemy throughout FF7 Rebirth which we can find empowering itself with anima actually, and it's just the right one needed to where we can extrapolate those claims out further. The Joker Fiend in Gus's Beast Battleground, described as a cursed jester who feeds on souls. Joker repels you with Anima Howl when pressured, and at low health it buffs itself with the attack Anima Unleashed. Both the Animus and Anima attacks are new for FF7 Rebirth. Neither the Gi Spectre nor Joker had these moves in the original game, so these aren't leftover relics, but deliberate new additions asking to be read into. I've honed into Animus as being Terra's lifestream energy, so what is the Anima referred to here? As expected, it appears to be the name of the Gaian spirit energy which Joker extracts through its Soul Sucker attack. Particles from the Anima lifestream are named Marco, and they generally manifest as bright circular orbs. Particles from the Animus lifestream I reckon would be named Blood, based on the nomenclature of the Sea of Marco versus the Lake of Blood, or as defined by mechanical and visual synergy with the Red lifestream and its Wall of Blood seen in the Third Birthday, which I will explain the potential for continuity with in Part 4. Not that red Marco or green blood doesn't exist at all in Rebirth, but there is a marked physical difference between the two materials. Anima Pyreflies are clean orbs with clear trails. Animus Pyreflies are more spiky and leave a murky trail behind. With that said, based on the consistency with which the Gi tribe are depicted with a genuine red lifestream in their questlines or their murals, and the fact that this is an actual clean lifestream rather than the viscous substance of Nero and Vincent's stagnant lifestream or the sandy texture of Sephiroth's negative lifestream, I do yet believe that they natively have red spirit energy. Color-wise, maybe there's something to do with polarities, right? But for the most part, Animus is defined through the color red for Gi and Jenova specimens. I do acknowledge and admit that red anima and green animus have been witnessed, and I will revive this observation later, but for simplicity's sake, just like Gaia's lifestream is fundamentally identified as being green, Terra's lifestream does seem as though it's red with a similar degree of finality. Neither Gi Natak nor Aerith's Soul Dream pull out this green energy, but those might functionally be different since they're absorbing mana instead of legitimate soul energy. When the Fiend becomes pressured, it then uses the souls it had stolen in order to envelop itself in a green miasma, similar to the Gi's red Animus miasma. Interestingly, Joker takes this anima spirit energy and imbues it into its various cards. We could potentially connect this to the way that the Shadow Blood Queen's Animus spirit energy was embedded into her Queen's Blood card. Keep in mind that Joker itself is not the anima representative. Just to reiterate, Animus and Anima are the gendered biological circuits of the Katamari quantum computer which it employs as part of its deliberative process when responding to queries and requests. Animus is the destructive male-coded logic route. Anima is a protective, female-coded logic route. With that gendered criteria in mind, Joker would not fit as Anima. The Gi tribe seem to all be men, but Joker does not present female. I considered if Joker may be a heavily clothed Gi woman, but this isn't the case. We can spot ashen skin visible on its hands and chin instead of blue, and it has sharp fingernails. None of those traits match the Gi. The 1997 Joker design did have a tusked mask akin to Jenova and the Gi, but they've retooled that for Rebirth. Joker also had another version called the Death Dealer, which we may see in Revelation. Joker is only stealing anima in order to charge the Heart, Club, Spade, and Diamond cards with a green aura. When it draws the Joker card bearing its own motif, that particular one has a red haze more akin to Animus, as per Jenova and the Gi tribe. Branching off of that discussion though, the more problematic element, at least as far as a one-to-one parallel is concerned, is that in Xenogears, Animus and Anima are both components of the Deus system. The deus equivalent in FF7 is Jenova. If we go all in on the parallels, this would mean that Gaia needs to have some origin in Jenova's genetic material as well, which it doesn't. The Cetra muse that Jenova may have been the one that motivated the humans to wipe them out, but that's not enough to tie all life on the planet back to Jenova, especially not when she only made contact 2,000 years ago. Nevertheless, I do like this reading where Animus is Terran lifestream and Anima is Gaian lifestream. Hiding this terminology within FF7 Remake's setting like this is just one way of galvanizing a link between Jenova and the Gi tribe, since it helps to confirm that their red spirit energy is a distinctly different substance to Gaia's lifestream. I did go through and double check what color of spirit orbs Joker fades away into when defeated, just to check whether it's green, red, purple, or whatever. Which was not easy, since the only encounter with the multiple Jokers needed in order to view one dissipating is the non-repeatable Ultimate Party Animal quest. The Beast Battleground, as if knowingly trying to hide this from me, loads back to the menu before Joker's fading animation begins, even if you disable HUD to stay looking at it longer. Meaning I had to do a lot of side questing to get back there from chapter select. Joker fades away into white orbs. I'm sure that I noticed a small few other enemies with no colour to their lifestream throughout my Rebirth playthroughs, but the only ones I've managed to conclusively turn up while working on this blog post are the Gi tribe's ceremonial two-face mask, Hojo's R&D creation the Adjudicator, and the Panthera Protector. I did check other things which I thought might fall in this group, such as the Stone Golem or Ironclad, but they had the standard green. Even Tonberries have souls apparently, and the black robes dye green with just a hint of purple. My sample size admittedly is lacking, since it's hard to try and locate every enemy to double check them, but I would therefore think that the blank coloration indicates either a homunculus or soulless lifeform. That seems like a relatively safe reading to me. Things which have form and have life, but no genuine soul of their own. Since Gaia subsumed Terra, can Animus be converted to Anima? The Gi do still have some lifestream left inside of their cavern or their field spells, just not enough to embody Terra's planetary soul and so create an afterlife. Gaia subsuming Terra could be that it used its own massive power to convert Animus into Anima and so absorb it. Or it could just be referring to how it takes the little remaining dredges of Terran lifestream inside of itself, locking it away within a magically compartmentalized underground cavern. With that said, I do have reason to believe such a conversion is possible, and it does inform something vitally important. But the dot point elaborating on that is about 3 hours later, located within the third section of this thesis. If Final Fantasy X is in the same universe, and some people of Spirin descent exist on Gaia, how does the name of the Anima Aeon coexist with the Anima and Animus soul material? So, where these psychology terms Animus and Anima actually originate from are the theories of Carl Jung. Rather than conform to Freud's framework of ego, superego, and id, equating to consciousness, conscience, and instinct, Jung took to the idea of the ego, shadow, and either animus or anima. In his original definition, the animus is the masculine aspect within a woman, and the anima is the feminine aspect within a man. However, the Xeno series, and subsequently FF7, have always dropped that quantifier, instead just having it where animus is some kind of phenomena that manifests out of men, and anima is always found within women. FF10's Anima has multiple intentions behind its name. The reason anybody ever thought to link FF10 and FF7 is because of stylistic and setting overlaps. One key part of this is that Seymour is some kind of iteration on the Sephiroth character, with his relationship to the grotesque mother Anima paralleling that to Jenova. So the reason for this entity being named Anima could be further traced back to Xenogears and its ties to FF7. You have the malign mother of humanity created out of the female anima circuitry and instructing the 12 Animus men to retrieve the lost anima relics. Then FF7 Remake picks this up where there's some implicit link between Cosmic Mother Jenova and the Animus-wielding Gi tribe. Produced between those two products, FF10's adoption of the term Anima is paying homage to Xenogears through FF7. In terms of how we would now reconcile this within FF7 Remake's vernacular, I don't know. It might not reconcile. I will say that in the original FF7, the Joker's idle pose had its arms crossed on its chest, just like FF10's Anima. Joker in Rebirth is the key enemy to identifying the anima terminology for the livestream. You could probably take that connection somewhere. While I have mainly highlighted the etymological evolution of this term through Jungian psychology adapted into Xenogears and reclaimed by FF7 Remake, another layer of congruence here is that anima is simply the Latin term for soul. My particular point of reference is the phrase appearing in the lyrics of Est One's Interius, a section in Karl Orff's most famous cantata, which uses the phrase mortuus in anima, or my soul is dead. I point this song out specifically because Est One's Interius and Veni Veni Venias of Orff's Carmina Burana are both lyrically referenced by One Winged Angel, and another line in the performance says Factus de Materia. Materia possibly being another phrase appropriated for use in Final Fantasy VII's lexicon. The Two-Face and Adjudicators make sense, but why do the Panthera Protector and Joker have white spirit energy? You could sustain an argument that these two fiends are those existing closest to Jenova due to mutation and anima soul draining. That second part is probably why the spirit orbs are white. Jenova is not only a physical mutagen, but also a spiritual parasite. We see that the black robes have purple energy alongside their Gaian green when they fade away. This is evidence of Jenova attacking not just their flesh, but their spirits as well. Therefore, the Panthera Protector may have been fully drained of all its anima, leaving only an empty spirit behind. Animus and anima. Is there maybe one more Katamoni element we could assign to the purple livestream that we see outside the village of the Gi? Look, not especially. If we're trying to symbolically compare this to Xenoblade, then you would obviously just assign these as Ontos, Logos, and Pneuma. However, while Xenoblade's Trinity processor is tantamount to Xenogears' Katamoni quantum biocomputer, as both are supercomputers that use a golden monolith to rewrite spacetime based on the consensus reached by three deliberative elements, they aren't quite one-to-one. To explain the details in full is genuinely truly off-topic, and I've gone through this before in a different video anyway. The short, though, is that the Trinity processor has three artificial intelligences which debate any given prompt, while Katamoni has three types of deliberators across two chambers of discussion. Katamoni has a Fullerene quantum computer calculating ideal answers on one side, then the other half has biocomputer circuits of 12 male animus and 12 female anima debating to reach a consensus. That chamber's answer is then weighed against the Fullerene computers in order to decide upon the course of action. While absolutely analogous to one another as both are the final machine arbiter in the decision-making process that depend on the gendered emotional cores to stabilize their own computer brain, Katamoni's Fullerene quantum computer is not a distinct AI entity in the same manner that the Trinity processor's Ontos is. So the last of this livestream trinity cannot be the equivalent of Ontos or the quantum computer in order to complete the Katamoni trifecta. The color schemes would begin to stray a little as well, since Ontos is red and Logos, Xenoblade's version of Animus, is violet. The elements which comprise Katamoni are the Fullerene quantum computer, the 12 Animus biocircuits, the 12 Anima biocircuits, and a central pod system called Persona, which the computer can use to artificially grow a living human body, she who comes to be called the Mother of Humanity. Persona/the Mother have purple hair when they first land on the planet, and the remaining livestream needing identification is purple. This could be used in conjunction with the Animus arguments to galvanize the idea that Jenova, who is equivalent to Deus and would be equivalent to the Mother, was some kind of progenitor to planet Terra, in this case associating purple with cosmic motherhood. Once again, this does begin to veer though, as the Gi tribe have red spirit energy, and it's the presence of Jenova also having red spirit energy in many key moments that makes me believe it's worth trying to link them in the first place. Regardless of the symbolics or the specifics, I do think that this third stream is likely to be indicating Jenova's presence within the life stream though. While Jenova does frequently feature red spirit energy, it's unclear if this is her native colour or if she began displaying this tint after eons spent in consuming Terra's lifestream. If not her, then it may also be indicative of the subworlds which Zack and Sephiroth are journeying through. Green is Gaia, and accepting red to be Terra, then the presence of this third violet lifestream may be why Aerith begins seeing into World B when hanging her hand in the stream. Could be either, could be none. So, seriously speaking, I cannot place that bluish-purple lifestream yet. I have multiple interpretations, but no genuine, concrete answers about Jenova's ties to the Gi tribe and what we may discern of their spirit energy colorations. Animus aside, why is the red miasma considered important? Here are some relevant excerpts of enemy intel. Gina Tarx says, "The leader of the Gi are people who were driven to extinction and cursed to roam as spirits, rejected by the lifestream. He and his clan have been sealed in an underground cave, left to fan the flames of their hatred and the red miasma that envelops them." The Soul Flames intel says, "Enkindled spirits of the Gi summoned by Gina Tark." And the Erasaurus says, "A large herbivorous beast that has been possessed by a spirit of the Gi. Highly aggressive and shrouded in a scarlet miasma, it bellows in pain and anger as it destroys everything in its path." Gina Tark's red miasma is given particular attention and tied back to his tribe. He also uses this to enkindle the soul flames. The Gi spectres fade away into red particles, whereas beings native to Gaia dissipate into green. There's even a side quest where some Gi spectres breach containment, using their red miasma to aggravate Gaian lifeforms. The enemy intel of the possessed Erasaurus again specifically calls out the scarlet miasma. The Gi's red lifestream is therefore given a very particular focus. We fight Gina Tark, whose enemy intel specifically mentions his red miasma. We converse with Gina Tark, who has red spirit particles. Immediately after this meeting, Sephiroth's haze has a tinge of red in it for the first time. We depart for his village, whereupon the game shows us red, green, and purple as distinct, separate streams. The red lifestream appears alongside the Gi once more in the Hall of Murals. That progression of imagery is clearly saying something, right? The game seems to have made rather specific implications during the scenes with Gina Tark. It feels like they're saying it's something more, and I want it to be something more. How does this account for the multicolored materia or the red light of doom from Minerva's materia? It does not, because I don't believe those to be of significant import. The materia are fashioned into different colors according to their magical category, and they glow that color because their crystals are that color. If the Gi's spirit energy is supposed to be red, why do the soul flames exhibit several other colors? If you let Gina Tark's soul flames linger for a bit, 4 of them will start to glow in red, purple, green, and yellow. After a little while, they use the move Possession, where they blast you with a purple fire spell and then sacrifice their colored energy to Gina Tark. He uses this to charge his Execration of the Gi field spell. There are multiple possibilities for what this might mean. The first of which is that this is just magic, not spirit energy. It blasts out of the soul flames with this fiery trail that matches neither animus nor anima. The coloured flames are the same as the 4 debuff icons which appear on our status bar. Since the magic system of Spira's lifestream is so different to Gaia's, it's possible that these skulls may be Terra's equivalent to materia. Or it might be that such sinister sacrifice is the only way for Gina Tark to access materia like magic, since his own lifestream is long dead. For another possibility, they might indicate 4 major tribes from Terra who were unified under Gina Tark. The ceremonial altars, effigies, and idols are all these same colours, and we can locate warrior effigies with glowing parts to mostly the same. These perhaps represent either 4 factions within the Gi people or 4 main races on Terra. Gi Natak, however, is not part of them. The Black Materia mural shows us that there are 4 elders and then Gi Natak, giving their Grand Council a total of 5 representatives. That could be a reason why he would have governance over the souls of 4 other Gi tribes. Another option is that due to Jenova's blood running deep in them, you could possibly say that these soul flames are calling up the soul material of several other life streams that Jenova had successfully devoured in the past. Bugenhagen's little diagram of the solar system has planets that match these colours. I think that one's probably too much of a stretch though. I don't have a conclusive answer, but I like the idea of this death magic being Gi Natak's equivalent to materia now that he has no lifestream of his own. Why does Gi Natak's boss arena have 3 teal lanterns and 1 green one? With this one, I'm just going to have to say that I do not know. These 4 angel statues are representing the 4 tribe elders, yet they have teal flames instead of red. This applies to both locations where they're seen. At the ceremonial altar, all 4 angels have a teal flame, whereas in Gi Natak's arena, named the Discursive Round, just one of them has a green flame instead. What this is to tell us is beyond me. You might think it just means that only one elder remains active, which is Gi Natak. The leftmost statue is paired to the red idol, and Gi Natak is heavily linked to the colour red. So it makes sense, or at least seems to. But no, Gi Natak isn't part of that group. The Black Materia mural shows us that he's a 5th member of their governing body and perhaps the overall leader above the 4. So the one different effigy shouldn't be Gi Natak. Why is just one of them different then? I have no answer. Truth be told, there are a lot of different identifying colours to be found in the Cavern of the Gi. The ceiling statues are red, purple, teal, and yellow, which corresponds to the angel effigies. There are lanterns with purple, red, yellow, teal, and orange flames. The Gate of Grief, which features the most heavily mutated effigy where you can't even discern a face anymore, is purple. The Gate of Rancor is yellow, and the Gate of Anger doesn't have a spotlight on it, but does have teal lanterns at its back. There are statues with glowing weapons or armor in red, green, yellow, and blue, but not purple. I might be tempted to assign these as the 4 factions which made up the Gi people. But again, the Red Elder is not Gi Natak, so it's not like you could read this as the Red Tribe being the only one to remain. If I'm being completely honest here, the safer, and therefore far less fun reading of Lifestream colours would be that they all signify different emotions within the planetary consciousness. Stagnant Lifestream is said to be a result of the Cetra's emotional duress, causing some spirit energy to not flow properly. Sephiroth at the ancient capital is going off about the confluence of emotions and extracting spiritual power through spite, sorrow, and loss. The gates sealing the Gi in the cavern are named for anger, rancor, and grief, each accompanied by lanterns of differing colours. I'm focusing on the enemy intel linking the red miasma to the Gi as a people, but the full quote could also be read to imply that the red coloration is specifically the flames of their hatred. That's easier to smooth over and, admittedly, might be more workable. However, that reading doesn't feel complete to me, because the Gi are shown with a legitimate red lifestream on multiple occasions, and essentially every other instance of red spirit energy can be traced back to their touch. Have we seen Jenova depicted with red spirit energy or associated with the colour red at any point? Yes, quite a bit more than I'd realised actually. Enough to definitively associate her with it, I'd say. While her monsters, her champions, and her illusions are generally accompanied by a purple haze, there have been a significant amount of times in Remake and Rebirth that Jenova showcased red particles, red haze, or a red tinge to some of her attacks. Jenova Dreamweaver's acid has a red sheen, and she fires out some red magic orbs. Jenova Emergent has a red haze when its tentacles appear. Jenova Lifeclinger's chamber becomes increasingly red as you get through the first phase, and from second onward she begins to fire these red lasers which just feel different to the other attacks used. Those don't look like magic, they look like biological energy cannons she's grown onto her own body. The glimpse of Jenova death in the Revelation trailer also shows it having this red life stream in its arena, and red flames akin to the land of the Gi. In basically all of my previous reviews and interpretations of Final Fantasy VII Remake, I kept getting drawn back to the symbolic galaxies in the edge of creation, wondering what they mean. On one side, we have a brilliant golden wing. On the other, some demonic image at the center of a red galaxy. On the surface, these two symbols are just embodying the contradiction inside of Sephiroth, that genuine heroic desire which still exists on some layer of his fragmented mind. Pondering upon it deeper though, I had mused if perhaps that shape with its broad shoulders and dragon head was meant to be the Omega weapon and the surrounding red indicating chaos, with the golden galaxy then perhaps being Minerva. She and Chaos are kind of the god and devil of FF7. It was a stretch, but I considered it. However, with the newer material from Rebirth, we can now definitively match this to the Jenova mural, which depicts Jenova's woman manifested above the monster with red miasma at their back. There are also some smaller instances, such as some of Hojo's Jenova R&D experiments bursting out with these red spirit particles. The demonic entity, Cave Stalker, and Type 0 Behemoth are examples that particularly come to mind. Many instances of this red haze or particle can be traced back more uniquely to Jenova and Gi entities. Not all instances, but many of them. The other examples I can note off the top of my head, like the Hecdies or the corruption in the Temple of the Ancients, can be linked back to Jenova with fairly minimal effort. And the berserk states of creatures like the Ski or Levrikon probably just aren't meant to be looked at as seriously. Whereas purple is broadly applied to gravity magic and illusions. Trying to lock it exclusively to Jenova is a headache. However, the most important of any instance where Jenova glows red is the Shadow Blood Queen. This is the Jenova incarnation who most blatantly emanates red energy instead of purple, and this seems super duper ultra important because whatever historical consciousness was captured in the Shadow Blood Queen card is potentially the first time that we have ever established intelligent contact with Jenova. That genuinely seems to be Jenova herself talking to us, not Sephiroth talking through her as would usually be the case. Why our first sapient contact with Jenova's mind happens over a game of trading cards, I am not quite sure, but she's a cosmic horror. She can curse objects if she so pleases. I'm certainly not going to be the one to tell her no. And I did suggest earlier that there may be precedent in how Joker, a fiend descended from the Shadow Blood Queen, imbues the anima soul material into its own cards. While the purple shroud is definitely more common to Jenova and her spawn, we have seen red attached to her quite a bit as well. In some cases, it even seems to suggest that the red spirit energy might be more closely tied to her own individual existence, leaving the purple to perhaps be understood as just some abominable eldritch energy which she taps into. Have we seen Sephiroth with red spirit energy? Again, yes we have. Sephiroth is the originator, in fact. Not plot-wise, but that Sephiroth was the first place we saw it. Once he's finally defeated at the end of the original FF7, Cloud casts his nemesis soul into the life stream. As Sephiroth disperses, red Pyreflies are seen seeping out of his body. Rebirth, as mentioned, also has some red haze associated with Sephiroth at the village of the Gi. Interestingly, these red wisps do then quietly invade Cloud's body, so perhaps the intention for Geostigma and Sephiroth's persistence was in fact planted back during the original game. As per my thoughts on Animus and Anima, this red energy is what prevents these entities from being absorbed into Gaia's afterlife. Even though Sephiroth's spirit does enter the lifestream space, the physical sea of Mako, it doesn't melt back into the primordial soup. The only reason Sephiroth ends up there instead of remaining on the surface as an unsent is because the final battle happens at the core of the planet. The lifestream is the afterlife, the Chamber of Guff, and a material location existing deep within the world. So when Cloud knocks him down, the only area lower is the lifestream reservoir itself. Sephiroth plunges into it and the current begins eroding his soul instead of accepting it. Jenova Lifeklinger's enemy intel actually describes it as wanting to do something similar, aiming to get to the core of the planet and seep into the Sea of Marco from where it would begin feeding. The altars in Cosmo Canyon, which the Cetra built to placate the Gi tribe, also display some red within the green swirl. So it might be that the Gi made it into the Sea of Marco but were rejected, and so they sent their spirits back above ground. Sephiroth also tries to send his spirit body back to the surface, but is unable to after losing his memories. Jenova's apparent inability to die, which the Cetra speak of, is because she doesn't have Gaian spirit energy. She's got animus instead of anima. The way her, Lucrezia, the Gi tribe, and Sephiroth's immortalities are enacted is because functionally they linger as unsent. Do Jenova cells make you biologically ageless or undying on account of being unable to return to the lifestream? Bit of both, I would think. Lucrezia did claim to be incapable of dying during FF7, and creator comment in the Dirge of Cerberus official complete guide also indicates her to be physically alive inside of that crystal, just under a deep slumber from which she could willingly terminate at any point, due to having a body that can't easily perish. However, an in-game exchange in Dirge sees Lucrezia telling that her real body crumbled away long ago. This might be a contradiction on the part of Dirge's writers though, since it's a mere 3 years after FF7 where she had claimed bodily immortality. And in that original FF7, Jenova itself was also still implied to be an immortal organism despite this lifestream ghost idea not being part of the 1997 version of the lore. Vincent most likely gained his immortality by Hojo administering a more aggressive ratio of the soldier program's usual Jenova and Marco mix, and he explicitly does not age either. Vincent is not a spirit, but is biologically immortal. However, we don't necessarily know that the Gi were ageless, and they certainly are not undying. They are dead, it's just their spirits that can't disappear. So Jenova's immortality might have both a physical and a spiritual component, depending on the degree of fusion. Similar to how her powers also seem to be split into physical and spiritual divisions. Strong enough contact with her spirit can influence the minds of even those with no genetic overlap, such as Bachman or Regina. But her mutagenic properties depend on the target having a cellular conduit opened via her DNA virus. Could it be as simple as red being stagnant lifestream, perhaps blue is neutral, while green is what a healthy lifestream looks like? It springs to mind how Bugenhagen describes of the Gi, after death, the ghosts of the Gi linger like stagnant air. A Cosmo Canyon NPC in Rebirth also mutters the phrase, beneath our veil, bound and stagnant. Unlike Dirge of Cerberus, most depictions of stagnant lifestream in the remake series are red, though Nero's base colour is purple. But stagnant lifestream is now visualised as a distinct, thick, oily tentacle. It's not merely red or black lifestream, but a specific viscous composition that resembles neither the thicker blood wisps of animus or the lighter Marco particles of anima. The Gi do have that stagnant lifestream substance occasionally appearing within their animus. Specifically, it is glimpsed in the 2 Pyreflies during Promises to Keep, and in the Arise and Doom spells. But I think that is an effect and not a cause. Red doesn't automatically indicate it being stagnant, but it is stagnant and also is red. How sure am I that red lifestream is uniquely tied to the Gi tribe? Could we not simply say that it embodies death, grudge, or rejection by a lifestream? I don't know that the distinction matters. Accounting for some implied overlaps with Yu Yevon and Unalesca, whose green Spirin spiritual energy turns red after what I hypothesized to be contact with Jenova, then that might cement Jenova as the origin point, because Spira has definitely never had contact with Terra. Maybe the Gi originally had green anima life energy too, which was corrupted into animus by Jenova. In the vast span of the universe, red lifestream wouldn't be exclusively tied to planet Terra. Gaia has green energy, but we've also seen representations of other green omega weapons, and Spira's Pyreflies do occasionally manifest the same. But I wouldn't say that it simply represents dead, lingering spirits or their envy of the living, because in that case we'd have surely encountered it a number of times already throughout the compilation, remake, and the first half of Rebirth. Gaian life forms, even those foul and resentful, still vanish into green particles. The only entities to manifest red spirit energy or red streams are ones that do manage to connect back with the Gi by following along their evolutionary alignments. Just as green anima is demonstrably not exclusive to planet Gaia, so too might red animus not be exclusive on the universal scale. An infinite number of anima worlds and only a single animus world obviously makes no sense. Rather, animus and anima might represent two widespread lifestream polarities that a world can naturally develop around or be influenced by, existing across developed worlds all throughout space. I won't elaborate until much later, but the third birthday could be an instance showing that Earth was one such planet where the base element was red animus, and green anima is only glimpsed in the high ones. The Gi's two-face creation is seemingly capable of harnessing both anima and animus polarities simultaneously, and the Hellrider 2 switches to red lifestream via a move named Polarity Shift. Well, okay, I am getting a bit pedantic here because we're at a point where the distinction no longer matters, but I think there is some very, very small room to argue that the Gi's native lifestream might have actually been blue. There is a definite blue stream depicted in the Cavern of the Lifestream, with no one having appeared yet to claim ownership of. So based on the story of the Panthera Protector, which contracted Jenova's virus and seems to have had its spirit energy turn white as a result, it's possible that Jenova's own spirit energy is the red animus, which strips a target lifestream of its color and then gradually dyes it red. Lifespring crystals in Cosmo Canyon are shown drying up and turning white from the effect of Sephiroth's whispers. Perhaps that clues us into some kind of spirit energy interaction. Maybe we even go a step further and say that all lifestream is natively blue, as briefly seen in Bugenhagen or Seymour's presentations, and it could be the stewardship of the Cetra and Minerva that nurtured it into a healthy green. But in the context of the where and when, animus in modern-day Gaia is a unique tell that something relates to the Gi tribe, their destroyed homeworld, and their cursed materia. I don't align to the idea that lifestream is just the big mood ring that circles the planet, because the reason for the Gi persisting is because of this not being their native lifestream. While they are functionally akin to unsent, the thing preventing the Gi tribe from fading isn't emotional instability like Spira's unsent, but because the planet will never accept outsiders into its spiritual cycle. While Bugenhagen does mention the Gi being unable to join the lifestream in the original game, he never actually explains why. It's only in Rebirth that they're established as extraterrestrials. However, the idea of foreign entities being unable to assimilate into the lifestream originates from Maiden Who Travels the Planet, where Hojo hints that many alien beings have fallen to Gaia in its lifetime, but that they linger due to their souls being unable to disperse. It's more interesting and in my opinion more accurate to say that the Gi's red miasma, as focused upon in their intel, is distinct indication of their alien origins. In that case, how would Meteor finally let the Gi vanish? It doesn't address the underlying incompatibility. Not sure. Maybe because the black materia is charged with such a lofty dose of their animus energy that it would allow the Gi to be dissolved by Meteor as it impacts the Earth. Or maybe by destroying Gaia, their souls would be flung back out into space, where they could rejoin with the universe's own giant lifestream cycle mentioned in Dirge of Cerberus. Maybe Part 3 will just not address this at all. There's really no way to tell how Meteor will interact with the unsent Gi at this stage. Have the Gi tribe displayed any Jenova-like abilities? As a boss, Ginatak uses his haze to teleport around the arena in a similar way to Jenova Dreamweaver, the Shrieker, the Diabolic Creations, and even Sephiroth himself. The Gi are more or less ghosts though, so that movement's not especially definitive. Ginatark does appear from within a Jenova-like purple haze in the Ever Crisis depiction, but it remains to be discussed how much that is worth when they otherwise do not exhibit purple energy elsewhere. However, Ginatark and Jenova Lifeclinger do both use blue flame spells, while the Phantasmal Scourge and Sanguinary Flame attacks look near identical minus the Gi faces. Ginatark's battle form itself shares some noteworthy overlap with Jenova Lifeclinger. Both have some kind of core within an exposed ribcage and a long detached spine that floats about them like wings. In the renders, the colour of Ginatark's feathers do loosely call to mind Jenova Lifeclinger's wings. Ginatark's hands in his battle mode have lighter blue veins or specks throughout, which make his skin resemble the Marconoid and also evokes Jenova Lifeclinger's wings. Furthermore, the whole Village of the Gi sequence might be compared to the same kind of reality-altering hallucination that Jenova induces. After coming upon Seto's altar, Ginatark leads us down an open path, then over a cave river in order to reach his land. Once the party have walked up the mountain and promised Ginatark that they'll retrieve the black materia, a lifestream haze sets in. After which, everyone comes back to consciousness in Seto's cavern, with that pathway blocked by a wall of stone, as if the entire thing had been a dream. But everyone remembers it, and the Gi spectres in the Promises to Keep side quest reconfirm that the village exists and that the Gi tribe did genuinely create the black materia, rather than it all just being one of Jenova's lies. Therefore, this phenomena may have been similar in nature to the arenas that Jenova summons for its boss battles, which are stated to be a kind of physical illusion. For curiosity's sake, have the Cetra displayed any Jenova-like abilities? There are a small few things which come to mind, but not as some massive conspiracy about the true nature of the Ancients. I wouldn't believe that they willingly accepted Jenova's cells or that they're secretly alien cultists whose whole presented history is a lie or anything of that direction. But there are certain phenomena in their temple where you could wonder if maybe they witnessed Jenova's power and then attempted to replicate it for their own defenses. The main example that particularly comes to mind is that the Temple of the Ancients' trial chambers do use that same kind of haze to induce memory-reading, reality-altering hallucinations. This is Jenova's forte. When Tifa passes into the Nebel reactor and the door behind her disappears, the lighting even calls to mind the Jenova dreams from the first soldier. Jenova is known to be immortal, and her immortality can be imparted onto her subjects. The guides in the Hall of Murals introduce themselves as "we who dwell in eternity." I would sooner assume this is referring to these individual souls who stand watch over the temple though, not a Jenova-esque eternal life. But it's still worth mentioning since it overlaps their aesthetic a little. During the Hall of Murals section, the Cetra's spirits either transform into or summon 3 particular kinds of fiends, whose enemy intel, attacks, or design all provide reason to argue that they specifically are past victims of Jenova saved by the Cetra. The grotesquely mutated Panthera Protector contracted a strange illness, the moss-grown Adamantoise has red spirit energy, and the Floating Death uses void magic. The visual effect used for their appearance is similar to when the Black Robes transform into Jenova or the Gi spectres manifest out of their lingering Pyreflies. This may also be the same root cause of the phenomenon earlier in the Labyrinth, where some deceased soldiers are transmuted into fiends. Since they're soldiers, it may be argued that their Jenova cells are responsible for enacting the change, and so linking the two phenomena would mean that the Cetra's magic was interacting with the Jenova factor. For a lesser angle, one might theorize that the temple itself is charging off the black materia's energy in order to address the haze and red particles. That'd be a much simpler way to explain the Jenova-like phenomena contained within, though I don't subscribe to it myself since this decidedly is not a simple discussion. What is the pattern on Ginatark's core? Once again, not 100% sure. I think it should be some kind of a face since it has the same beady forehead eye as the Deep One statues and whatever entity is depicted on their shields. Geenotarch's battle mask has a crystal on its forehead, so maybe it's just some artistic representation of himself. Or if you flip it vertically, then it also kind of looks like a crow skull, and Geenotarch is wearing a necklace of those. But I feel like, with everything in context, it's gotta be some kind of Jenova growth. I will discuss this core again later. What are the statues in the cabin of the Gi? There are two distinct types of statue in the cabin which look like fishmen and goatmen, and there are Gi effigies of a headless, humanoid, mutated, and gigantic stature. They might be other humanoid races from Terra. They might be armor that the Gi wore to battle. They might be different forms that Jenova mutated them into. They might simply be symbolic. There seems to be some link between their forms and Geenotarch, since his core has that same beady forehead eye, but I don't know that there's enough information present in the game to put together a worthwhile explanation. What is that necklace worn by one of the Gi elders? I really do not know, and I wish I did. It seems pretty damn important, but I can't quite place it. It somewhat resembles a shape in the Gi mural and is at odds with the square tesseract motif that the Cetra use. So perhaps it's meant to embody Terra's lifestream and the four orbs on the side are the elders or something like that. I just don't think there's enough information or comparison present to take it all that far, unfortunately. Do the Gi tribe even exist then, or are they purely just a large-scale Jenova hallucination to lead the party toward the black materia? There's some weirdness surrounding their existence considering they're caged within an unsent afterlife. But as a people, they should legitimately exist. The Cetra have records of their history that well predate Jenova's hallucinations arriving on Gaia. Furthermore, revelations from the Ultimania Omega may indicate that, at least in the original FF7, Jenova seemingly did not possess knowledge about the black materia until Sephiroth discovered it, which may still be true of Rebirth, since his abrupt shift in personality hints that Sephiroth did not learn of it through his access to Jenova's own mind. On the other hand, the black materia is especially strange in the remake saga, in the sense that, at the end, Cloud merges it onto his Buster Sword to hide it, which is very much not normal behavior for materia. Them boys need weapon slots. Using that to launch off of, you could cook up this idea that maybe the Gi did use the black materia to summon Jenova's meteorite to the planet millennia ago, but then they were incinerated instead of remaining as spirit bodies. Then what we encounter in current day would be Jenova constructing that whole Village of the Gi sequence as a hallucinatory dream to guide Sephiroth and Cloud towards some cosmic artifact of her own, merely masquerading as materia. That strange piece of metal inside Swordsmith Masamune's chest seems to be what inspires his mutation and powers, which he then forges into his katana. Hypothetically, perhaps Jenova's black materia could be something similar that has now taken over the Buster Sword. But that starts to feel a bit silly, because in order to justify that, you basically have to claim that the Gi spirits, the Cetran spirits in the temple, and that whole black materia hullabaloo is one giant, unnecessarily convoluted scheme enacted by Jenova, who, by the way, should not really even be awake right now, since Sephiroth has control. So it's just like, you could reach for this theory, but I wouldn't bother. At the very least, it has no place in this piece, since if the Gi and black materia are both fake, then literally what am I even doing here? They must exist. Further, considering how frequently the Cavern of the Gi repeats its symbolism of the Gi tribe having 4 elders, which excludes Geenotarch, I do somewhat question if he might be Jenova's main vassal from Terra, equivalent to Sephiroth. I can't really develop that idea any further as yet though, and don't know if his attitude really agrees with that either. If the Gi were exposed to Jenova cells before Gaia, did they carry the mutagenic pathogen with them and inspire any mutations before Jenova itself arrived millennia later? I've gone down multiple lines of thinking. I've cross-checked many enemy intel summaries, and I believe the answer to this is that yes, they have. Only a small sample which the Cetra must have been able to snuff out before it truly became a pandemic. However, there are a select few enemies whose history should stretch back to before Jenova's arrival, yet they display mutagenic traits which I believe align to both the Gi tribe, Jenova, and something else. Give me time though, because it's a long pathway to get there. If Terra's lifestream is red, and Jenova is also shown emanating red spirit energy at many points, what does this mean for her usual purple particles? There is intention behind how FF7 Rebirth uses all its lifestream colours. The red miasma in the Cavern of the Gi is very striking, and assessing the Gi enemies specifically paints it as a point of attention. Gi Natak has this unusual red hue to his spirit energy particles. The red coloration then shows up in Sephiroth's haze as well immediately after. And as Gi Natak ferries us to the village, we see streams of green, red, and purple or blue. The game deliberately shows us 3 different streams right after that incident with Sephiroth's red haze. This is no accident. It surely reads as them trying to tell us something about spirit energy and alien life streams. So then why, if the Shadow Blood Queen is one of Jenova's earlier incarnations, does her spirit contained within the Queen's Blood card emit red energy? Jenova's is predominantly always purple. Nobuo Uematsu mentioned that Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze was a key inspiration for One Winged Angel. Consider this cover by Uematsu's Earthbound Papa's Band. Maybe that's part of the reason why Remake has now consciously been connecting Jenova and Sephiroth's illusions to this purple haze. While the extent to which it's been featured is certainly new, there is actually a purplish fog when Sephiroth casts an illusion to attack the party in the Whirlwind Maze. They might have taken that single instance and made it a concrete aspect to her powers. However, trying to frame the purple haze as some effect uniquely tied to Jenova and emblematic of her own spiritual touch actually introduces more issues than it solves. Purple energy in FF7 Remake has been predominantly associated with Jenova's presence. However, Rebirth hints that this may actually be circumstantial. There are various instances of it being used in a way that doesn't conform to this. Many monsters cast purple magic or have purple haze. Heck, even Kate Sith summons his Moogle through such a mist. Is Kate Sith, a cat clown robot, the second son of Jenova? I'm going to put that one at a probably not. The most significant example I want to bring up, though, is the Wanderer of the Void, Gilgamesh. The Proto-Relic questline in the Nebel region has the party accompany a bunch of the Black Robes as they journey to various locations throughout. The easy assumption to make is that they're being driven by their reunion instincts, as the monsters waiting at 2 out of 4 locations are escapees from Hojo's research labs, presumably injected with a large amount of Jenova cells. The one monster that isn't, however, is the actually important one, an Ahriman subspecies called the Sanguine Scourge. Side note, Jenova Lifeklinger defends itself with Sanguinary Flame when pressured in Phase 3. Assessing the Fiend describes it as wielding an unknown energy which it gained by ingesting the Proto-Relic. We see this manifest in battle as these transient swords coated in a purple sheen. Getting a good look at the swords reveals them to be copies of Gilgamesh's Excalibur. The Reunion clones were drawn to the Sanguine Scourge because of the Proto-Relic's purple energy signature. In that case, it could be suggested that the point of this questline was to indicate that the purple energy belongs to the Void, and Jenova is simply one of many life forms to eat into it. Another Ahriman subspecies known as the Floating Death also uses a move called Void Scent to shoot out purple dimensional energy blasts, and that one is possibly a past victim of Jenova DNA due to the other fiends it's grouped with. In fact, even Sephiroth's cross attack during Chapter 1 is called Void Shatter, which entails him imbuing the Buster Sword with his purple magic. So rather than Jenova, it must be sign of the Void. Sephiroth did understand the nature of Gilgamesh's existence at a glance, perhaps due to his familiarity with Jenova. Furthermore, his portal to the Edge of Creation at the end of Remake looks near identical to Gilgamesh's. There's also a very striking similarity in effect when Gilgamesh charges his Muramasa up with wispy purple energy, looking just like a move that Sephiroth had done against the Materia Guardian. Based on Gilgamesh's Void Portals and Genji armor having purple energy, I'm led to think that the Void energy is purple, not specifically Jenova. Perhaps she began as an alien with green or red spiritual energy, which turned purple when she breached into the Eldritch realm. Or more loosely, I think that purple indicates space, gold indicates time. Timeline gates on the path of Sephiroth or time spells like haste are golden, whereas it seems as though all magic pertaining to spatial distortion carries this purple glow. Gravity spells used by Sephiroth, the Valeron, and the Demon Wall are purple. Meteor is a gravity spell too. It doesn't actually summon anything, but rather magically pulls in a dwarf planet. Accordingly, the Black Materia mural does show the Gi imbuing it with purple magic. Sephiroth's dash and even Cloud's triple slash leave a purple trail behind when they move faster than the eye can see, perhaps indicating that the way in which they move so fast is by magically bending space, so to speak. While Cloud's triple slash, which has visibly powered up from Remake to Rebirth, could just be evidence of Sephiroth's growing influence upon him, I'd sooner see it as something in favour of purple being that associated with the conceptual force of space. A Jenova derivative experiment called the Hellrider 2 does oddly use a yellow form of gravity magic, and we've seen Vincent appearing to use a red gravity technique in the Revelation trailer, but I am simply going to write those up as outliers for now. That's the direction my observations are trending. I wonder if the game has anything to say about it. I keep bringing up that enemy intel is what spotlights the red livestream as being such an oddity for Gina Tark. It sure would be embarrassing if I went down this whole run of screenshots trying to figure out what the purple means when the game blatantly describes it to us somewhere in Jenova's enemy intel. Oh hey, Jenova Dreamweaver's enemy intel says, information on it is scarce, but it is believed to induce hallucinations. Jenova Emergence says, it is able to induce hallucinations that warp the very space around it. Jenova's haze induces hallucinations that somehow warp physical space. The enemy intel for Dreamweaver and Emergent tells this to us directly, and some of their magic spells are named Dreams of Pestilence, Dreams of Quietude, or the like. Reality-altering dreams and hallucinations. This is how Jenova keeps summoning its arenas and teleporting throughout. The Shrieker hybrids are also shown teleporting in the same manner. I'm not wholly sure how to rationalize this hallucination aspect that can directly affect space-time, since until now her delusions had been a power exclusively exerted over the minds of those possessing her cells, whereas when she needed to affect those without her DNA, she would physically transform her cells into the shape of someone else, like John Carpenter's The Thing. That hallucination claim almost makes it sound like Jenova isn't a cellular shapeshifter, but just an illusionist, which to me doesn't reconcile with what we know of her two-way genetic conduit from Crisis Core, or the Shadow Blood Queen's spilt blood which spawned the fiends of the world. But maybe this is just a wholly different avenue of her power. She shapeshifts and causes hallucinations, covering both bases in her game of deception. Nevertheless, Jenova is warping space to manifest the boss fight phenomena. That's what the game itself tells us. We can then extrapolate this to suggest that all the other purple particles or clouds are likely indicative of spatial distortion too, and that is what my own findings have supported. Considering we have 2, maybe 3 distinct versions of the Black livestream, it must be asked, do I think that Jenova's purple is the same as Gilgamesh's purple? You know what? I do. I have come to think that's the case. Even since my first playthrough of Rebirth, I'd somehow gotten this impression that Gilgamesh's presence was more significant than the story was letting on, that he wasn't just a side quest cameoed this time, but that the game was subtly heaping important context upon his shoulders. The Void is debatably quite important in FF7 Remake even before him anyway. I am still in the camp that says Sephiroth's corrupted savior complex and a lack of any true divergences in story trajectory mean the remake games are not time loop sequels like everyone preaches they are. They're just massively expanded and meandering along the way. The motivations of film Sephiroth are fundamentally and irreversibly changed from game Sephiroth after the livestream burnt away all his lingering human nuance. However, I have also blogged about the opposite view, highlighting how FF7 Remake's Edge of Creation does have enough interdimensional rift imagery to adequately justify that if you want it to be a time loop, then you can just say, well, Sephiroth does the same thing Garland did, and the wider Final Fantasy multiverse sorts its own details out. Garland uses the Void to travel back 2,000 years. Sephiroth has portals that look identical to Gilgamesh's Void Gates, so he just did the same thing as Garland. Toss out all your multi-hour video essays because you just go 1, 2, 3 and you've got yourself a time loop. Figuring this all out is tough if you try to stay within FF7's boundaries, but considering it more broadly as just a Final Fantasy game, you can do it pretty quick. I ultimately don't agree with that verdict. My opinion is that all this extra space-time lore is just in service to Sephiroth's coming deification, but the possibility to explain it like this is quite straightforward. So with regards to this topic of energy color and the identification of foreign life streams, in trying to figure out why the heck Jenova's Shadow Blood Queen is red, this new understanding has dawned upon me: the Void. Sephiroth detected Gilgamesh's presence because his energy signature was similar to Jenova and Masamune, and using that to extrapolate on all the lifestream colors reveals a less layered, but far easier to accept understanding of things. Jenova herself isn't necessarily purple. That's perhaps just the eldritch component of her magic. Are the Whisper's purple particles the same as Jenova's and Gilgamesh's? You could interpret it both ways. They're trying to stop Sephiroth from manipulating Gaia's future, which as per my prior terms effectively means that they intend to counter his attempts to abuse the Void as Garland did, which might mean that they necessarily must have the capacity to reach into the rift, thus explaining their purple particles. On the other hand though, the path of Sephiroth which controls destiny seems to be an internal domain within the planet and the lifestream, rather than an interdimensional space. Like Gaia somehow contains its own infinite event tree that manifests as these transient multiversal dreams. In which case Sephiroth's ambitions for the timeline wouldn't be reaching into the Void, and neither would the Whispers, which are probably in existence something along the line of weapons. So really, this is another one where we've just got to wait for the finale before we can properly look back and understand everything. What colour is Jenova's blood? Jenova is shown to bleed purple during the Trail of Blood and the Lifeclinger battle. Sephiroth, in his fully revived body, has red blood during the ending FMV of the original game. I did notice though that the Project S concoction which Hojo derived out of Sephiroth's hair, blood and tissue in Rebirth's Nebel Manor is a vivid blue, which also matches to the blue blood when the Hell Rider's arm is lopped off. This is the same material that was plugged into Zack and Cloud's Marco tanks. Remake and Crisis Core Reunion both censored characters getting impaled with a grey haze, but Rebirth did away with that for proper blood. So it'd be interesting to see what colour both the real Sephiroth and his main Jenova clone bleed in the remake continuity. How many different colours of spirit energy do we see when enemies are fading away? Like Kadaj in Advent Children or Grimoire in Dirge of Cerberus, a new change in the Final Fantasy VII Remake games is that when organic enemies are defeated, they disappear into orbs of light. This is more of a gameplay mechanic to help declutter the field, I'd say, since we do see dead bodies lingering in cutscenes, and it's strange to imagine the world functioning when people just evaporate 2 seconds after death. There are also moments of the reverse, where the first out of the 2 initial necrotic entities encountered lingers on the floor until the following cutscene where they fade away. When enemies begin to fade away, the different hues of spirit energy do seem to be applied as individualized selections. It's not just a blanket green send-off, but dependent on what category of life form they are. I'm not conclusive on this. In order to be conclusive, I would have to do another entire run of Rebirth specifically just noting down for each and every single type of enemy. But to the best of what I can tell, I believe that I've seen 4 different colours of orbs. This is not including the blue effect when VR life forms are defeated, for obvious reasons. Generally speaking, Gaian life forms disperse into green. This also includes Hojo's R&D monsters like the Hellrider, void-imbued Gaian monsters like the Sanguine Scourge, and seemingly artificial Cetran constructs like the Stone Golem, Elder Golem, and Ironclad. The Gi Spectres vanish into red, and this also applies to the possessed enemies in the Promises to Keep side quest. I do know that just a select few creatures fade away into plain white orbs, though in my time working on this post, the only few I've managed to concretely go back in and identify are the Gi tribe's two-face puppets, the Adjudicators, the Panthera Protectors who guard the Temple of the Ancients, and the Jokers. I would think that this points toward them being homunculus or some otherwise soulless beings. Strangely, these enemies that disperse into white motes all emit a greyish fog while doing so, which is a quirk that none of the other colorations exhibit. Technically, white Marco particles do exist in the Sleeping Forest when Aerith comes to retrieve the white materia, but that's clearly related to Holy rather than something we would apply to any of these other entities. In the original 1997 version, Bugenhagen's presentation illustrates spirit energy coming in yellow, red, blue, and green. Technically, Aerith's iridescent lifestream is also a mix of green, blue, and red. I've yet to see an enemy fade away with such particles, but there has also been a golden spirit energy or lifestream-like substance associated with Minerva, Aerith, Holy, and the Hellrider 2, which seems to have been an experiment of Hojo's into lifestream polarities, given that it can shift into red as well. Lastly, Jenova Emergent can be seen burning away into purple orbs before the illusory haze kicks in. Sometimes there are mixes as well. The robed men still turn into green orbs with only a minor amount of dark haze and purple particles, and a similar mix is seen when the Whispers possess the Thread Spinner Chimeras. Those are the colours I've currently located. What do the different lifestream colours signify? If red is Terra and purple is the conceptual force of space, encompassing gravity, teleportation, and perception, then green is Gaia and gold should be the conceptual force of time. Notably, this can address some oddities like the pinkish haze in the Cetra's illusory trial chambers, the golden gates along the path of Sephiroth, the iridescent god rays that Sephiroth summons when he splits the sky at the City of the Ancients, or the green lifestream that leeches out of Jenova Lifeclinger's core when it gets smashed. All these colours would otherwise make no sense if they were exclusively tied to Jenova or the white materia. This concludes the first of 4 videos in this discussion sequence, which had focused most primarily on establishing an overlap between Jenova and the Gi tribe via their planetary history, their ancient mutations, and their signature red Animus lifestream. My questioning will continue in part 2.